Municipal Council work session today. It's Tuesday, January 23rd. It's 12:33, and we are convened in the City Center Conference Room. We will begin this meeting. Well, let's first, this meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, but it will also be available on demand view. Please be aware that the microphones in the room pick up noise, paper, and other rustling objects. Further be aware that microphones can pick up side conversations. We'll begin today's meeting with a roll call. Following the roll call, George Henley has been invited to city opening prayer.
Cliff Strachan,
Brian Jones,
George Hanley, Dave Anderson,
Gary Winterton, David Harding,
Bryce Mumford,
George Stewart,
Dave Connect,
Michelle Capuzzi,
Wayne Parker.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this opportunity to serve, grateful for this opportunity to convene, and we're grateful for the public and their input and assistance. We pray for wisdom and understanding and for guidance, and we ask that thy blessings will be upon this great city and upon our proceedings here today. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Our first item of business is approval of minutes. We propose that we approve the following: the December 5th work meeting and the January 3rd work meeting. Are there any changes or additions to those minutes? Seeing no objections, I declare these minutes approved by unanimous consent. Mr. Hardy.
if I can just commend our staff for the manner in which they handle the minutes, and it's great to have that so well done for us.
Thank you. I agree. You guys are awesome. Thanks. Before we proceed with the agenda, I'd like to remind those in attendance that although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those that are seated at the council table may speak or be asked questions unless otherwise directed by the council chair. So with that in mind, we'll go to item number 1. Discussion regarding the proposed amendment to Provo City Code Section 2.50.110, adjusting council committee structure. And Cliff, if you'll start us off with that.
Yep. So thank you, council members. Rules Committee started looking at the committee structure some time ago, and we've been through a lot of different suggestions and considerations. I'm going to start out at the very top. One of the things that we've looked at is putting in a definition into the definitions part of the code. And since we generally use council member, but there's increasingly a desire of council members to use councilor, which is a little bit easier on the mouth and the tongue. So we've added this as a definition. Councilor or council member means a duly elected member of the municipal council. One of the, if you go through the Provo Code, you'll have council member in many places, and the draft we've got below introduces councilor for the first time, and then rather than have the staff go through and bring to the council changes in the code for every time we use council member, this allows us to just change things over time. It's a common device. But as far as the committees, you've seen different emails that have gone back and forth discussing different ways to name committees, structure committees, etc. At the end of the day, the Rules Committee kind of settled on the idea that we just recognize that there is a committee. And that when we appoint a committee, when the council appoints a committee, that it designate the name and the mission of the committee, that whether the committee is standing or ad hoc, and then the structure of the committee with respect to its voting members. And if you recall, and we'll show up in a little bit, this year's proposed committee structure, we haven't got those in there yet, but we would add an extra box in the table that simply says those designations, so that when we look at them, we know we know what the committee structure is going to be and how the voting structure is with it. So what's being proposed is that a council committee is in which only councilors are voting members. A citizens committee has no councilors on it, and a mixed committee is a mix of councilors and voting members. There had been a discussion about whether a committee with staffers, city staff and the council was on it would have votes. And unanimously, the staff did agree that having staff as a voting member of a committee is not a good idea for a whole number of reasons.
Yes.
Sir?
Give me an example of a mixed committee.
Right now, a mixed committee would be the budget committee, the way it's structured right now. Another one West Side Planning was clearly a mixed committee. And probably
Was the zoning committee a mixed committee, or was that a council committee?
mostly a council committee, but it had staffers on it. And sometimes the question would go out, do you agree with this? And staff would say yes or no, whether they agreed with it, but it wasn't really a vote on a recommendation to the council.
So the only vote that took place was done by council members.
Right. Right.
If I could just say, I think one of the reasons that we're proposing this is because it hasn't necessarily been clear in the past. If you bring in members of the staff or the community, are they voting members? And sometimes it seems like it even kind of morphed over time. And so by doing this, it may help everyone understand how it's being structured.
Dave, Nick?
Yeah, so on our housing committee, for example, we decided we needed citizen involvement, but it wasn't just citizens. I mean, we have some neighborhood chairs, people representing various groups like the school board, or Provo Housing comes, and NeighborWorks, and Habitat for Humanity, and Community Action. We just tried to find those people that were either in the housing business or dealing with those groups that need housing and are affected by housing. So it was a kind of a broad spectrum. But we didn't actually come back and get those names, because they're all, when we did, voting members approved by the council, which would be now the way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, this would provide clarity as to who actually gets to vote, you know, and that, I think that will clear up some confusion that we've had in the past. One of the discussions that we had was on the name. We got stuck on whether it's a committee, a commission, working group. We're just three of many possibilities that came out. At the end of the day, we thought we could spend days and days arguing about what each one is. It would be simpler just to come up with this designation and identify it, because at the end of the day, most people end up referring to these things as committees anyway.
One thing that I would like to see on the mixed committee is, I think of our impact review committee. And I think which may have counselors, administrative personnel, and citizens as members. I'd like to have department heads be able to be considered part of the mixed committee. So they are citizens, but I think that they have a unique place, in, for example, in the impact review committee.
They are. I think for a whole host of reasons that unless you just have a staff committee reporting to the council or to the administration, we think there's real perceptional type problems of having staffers being given a vote for something that goes to the council with the council. For example, let's say you had a committee and suddenly you come to an impasse because the staff want this and the council wants this, you're going to have a hard time getting, as I heard the mayor say with some of the department heads, is I want honesty. I want you to be straight with me and just tell me how it is, because you don't want them making decisions based on our perception of what you think.
I'd like to hear what the administration thinks about that too.
About
having the department heads, department members being part of a committee, and specifically.
Well, you've struck a little nerve with me, because I have to tell you, I'm really concerned about this change. This is a dramatic shift between the balance of power between the two branches of government. Up until this point, only council members could form committees and be voting members. Because we have a whole separate set of actions around citizen committees, which we call boards and commissions. They're identified by statute. The mayor appoints, the council gives advice and consent. In this case, the mayor has no role to play when you appoint a citizens committee, and I think the code was written the way it was for a very specific reason, and that was not to impinge on the mayor's ability to create the boards and commissions, but to appoint the members and seek your advice and consent. To me, this flies directly in the face of that. I have no problem with council dividing itself into committees, and I think that's entirely appropriate. But the minute you make citizens voting members, you have created a board or commission, and you potentially supplant the role of another board or commission, and I don't know how to handle that. So I get really worried. This is a dramatic shift in that balance of how we handle citizen committees and the role played by both branches of government. So I'll just raise that concern right at the get-go. We haven't seen this. I haven't had a chance until just this moment to see it. But I can tell you, I have some very serious concerns. This is not what the voters selected when they chose our form of government.
Thank you. So if I could respond actually to the last two comments. So right here, we're talking about voting members, not necessarily committee members. So I'd look at like the development approval process review committee, where we had, Wayne and several department heads. They were participating and really did a lot of the work on that. But when it actually came time to voting on what we proposed, what we recommend to the council, it was just the voting members, which were the committee members.
Correct.
So I would say that the administrative staff were integral parts of the committee. They were part of the committee. They just weren't voting members. So just to be clear, we're not talking about, we're not going to allow anyone from the administration to be part of it. We need them on a lot of
Absolutely.
these committees.
We're very happy with that arrangement.
And then let me apologize. I've been on the rules committee and I've been kind of pushing this, and I apologize that we didn't bring it to the administration for comment before. We met yesterday morning trying to fit this in before we made our assignment.
Sure.
I'd recommend to the rules committee that we pull this back because we need the input. Let me just say, this has not been this wasn't power grab. Though I absolutely see what you're saying, and you bring up really good concerns. It's more of a reflection of this is kind of how things have been happening anyway. So
Right.
let's try to get our hand.
And we've raised objections along the way. Councilmember Sewell will tell you, he and I had some very heated discussions about the formation of the budget committee, feeling exactly that this was the problem. And so again, I think it just has to be understood that you can do what you want. We'll object. This would be one that, in my mind, would rise to the level of a mayoral veto if you wanted to proceed with this code change. I think it shifts the balance, and I don't think we should do that.
What are your thoughts on the West Side Planning Committee? Because we ended up with some council members and community members. I think it worked well, but you still would have said that's not the right way to do it.
Yes, we do neighborhood plans all the time. We know how to do those. Recognize the council wanted a more active say in the policies that were created by the West Side Planning Committee. But my sense is that when the council, under the current code, divides itself into committees, that means that only council members vote. You can bring advisors, you can bring others to the table, but at the end of the day, nobody votes for council members. By shifting this now and saying we're going to create committees in which others have a vote, that's what we do with boards and commissions.
So you would have the budget committee be as many advisors as they want, but only the council.
And actually, that was
members
our agreement, and we thought that was being lived to until we saw the recommendations last year from the budget committee, in which the votes were 6-0 and 5-1. There's only 3 council members on the committee.
Yeah.
So our agreement went out the window when the budget committee decided to do something different. And so I don't know, my sense is that that changed the parameter, and that's part of why I'm frustrated about this. We thought we had a tacit agreement that allowed us to feel comfortable with where you are, but the minute that was breached, I think we lost confidence that this would be a council dividing itself into committees.
Mr. Chair, can I please?
Please.
Okay.
Brian and I probably respectfully disagree on this.
And that may be it. But let me back up and say that the intent of the Rules Committee in bringing forth this particular proposal was to resolve a problem that has already existed since the handbook, since we did the handbook review and amendment at the end of the year. And so that's actually the background for this, because if you'll remember, when we brought you the complete handbook revision, there's already a provision in the handbook that talks about committees, and then there's a paragraph that talks about commissions and task forces, right? And as defined in the handbook, it already set out a procedure where a committee was, or I think it was called a subcommittee in the revision we brought to you. A subcommittee was a body made up only of council members. And a task force was a body made up of both council members and citizens. And a commission was a body made up only of citizens. And so, but as you remember, when we had that discussion, there was quite a bit of pushback about the use of some of those terms, right? There were certain council members that, at that point in time, there wasn't necessarily discussion about whether or not those bodies could exist or not. And so maybe that's why we didn't feel like we were making a substantive change in proposing this. But I can certainly see where you're coming from as far as having not seen it before. And so I'm not disagreeing with that comment. But there was quite a bit of pushback about the term commission, for example, right? And so what the Rules Committee, and almost as, even though that handbook revision was passed by the council, almost immediately it was not followed, at least with respect to that particular paragraph, because there was almost immediately discussion about forming committees, and we didn't use the terminology that had just been approved in the handbook. And so the Rules Committee felt like there was and I'm speaking for them, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the Rules Committee felt like there was a need to address that inconsistency, that we had just passed new handbook language that then wasn't being followed. And so we spent, quite a bit of time circulating all kinds of different proposals to say, well, okay, if you don't like the word commission, you don't like the word task force, what are the different words that we could use? Kind of at the last minute, the proposal that came back was this one, which was, instead of trying to come up with a different term for every single one of them, and then face the facts that the terms probably wouldn't be used consistently anyway, because that's just not been the custom and practice, why don't we just call all of them a committee and then designate what kind of a committee they are? And in doing so, if you'll scroll back up, Bryce, I don't know if you've got control. If you scroll back up to paragraph 1, the language in paragraph 1 is straight out of state statute. In 10-3B-203, which is the section which defines the powers and duties of a council in the council-mayor form of government. And in that section, in subsection 1B4, it says, among the things that a council may do, it says, appoint a committee of council members or citizens to conduct an investigation into an officer, department, or agency of the municipality, or any other matter relating to the welfare of the municipality, and delegate to an appointed committee powers of inquiry that the council considers necessary. So it's on that basis that, and this is where we may respectfully disagree, that I feel like the council has always had the power to appoint a committee on which citizens served. Now, the question is, in my mind, the real disagreement in my mind is, what are the powers of that committee? And where I don't necessarily feel like there is a conflict between this and between the mayor's ability to appoint boards and commissions is that a board and commission is authorized by both state statute and by city ordinance to actually advise the city, right? And because it has the scope of its authority is to advise the city on an issue, then the mayor has the appointment authority and the council has the advice and consent authority. In this particular instance, the only thing that is contemplated, in my mind at least by this, is the appointment of a committee whose sole authority is to advise the council, to consider an issue, to conduct as per state statute, to conduct an investigation into a matter relating to the welfare of the city, and then report back to the council about that investigation or that
Can you
topic.
read that phrasing again? Because
Yes.
that's what caught my ear.
Appoint a committee of council members or citizens to conduct an investigation into, 1, an officer, department, or agency of the municipality, or 2, any other matter relating to the welfare of the municipality.
Where Brian and I have disagreed on this before is that the word investigation happens before A and B. And so
Sounds like there's a
the committee's
problem.
role is to conduct an investigation. In my mind, that doesn't rise to the level of a budget committee or a West Side Planning Committee. It's not an investigation into something. It's attempting to set policy or recommend policy. In my mind, that's the role of a board and commission. So again, or a subset of the council who wishes to meet to consider policy, with a prescribed assignment of what to do. So rules committee makes sense to me entirely because it only relates to the council. But I think, again, that's just my argument. The operative word for me is investigation. And you can interpret that broadly and say, well, the budget committee will investigate the budget. But I don't think that's the intent of the law. I think that's a pretty broad interpretation. So again, Brian and I have had this discussion, as have Councilmember Sewell and I, and I've been on the short end of that stick. But I worry again that this is a step in the wrong direction, in my mind. So.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to process all of this. I think back on my experience in the neighborhood program with the area reps, 5 of them, and how they were entrusted to review matching grant applications. And the meetings were organized, hosted by staff, and typically the council member or members that were appointed over the neighborhood program would be present. The actual voting was done by the citizens, the neighborhood chairs, as to whether someone should get the grant approved or not. And I always, for me, it was always understood that they don't have the power to appropriate money. Therefore, it was a recommendation that the staff or the council member present or the council as a whole could say, we disagree, and override that because it was really just a recommendation. But nonetheless, it was kind of this mixed committee, and there never was a chair elected. But recently there was some confusion about that, but it was just 5 area reps, and they met and talked and voted. In that case, the neighborhood, the counselor over the neighborhood program did not vote, other than maybe a veto. But that veto may extend to the whole council if it rose to that level, because it never has, but we do have oversight on approving such things. So I don't know, for what it's worth, that's one committee I'm familiar with that I considered kind of a mixed committee, but then again, the council members were not voting.
I appreciate that, George. We're gonna get you.
We've always prided ourselves that our strong reform government is patterned after the federal and state government. Their committees don't have citizens.
That's correct.
So I tend to agree with Wayne that probably certainly a change from the kind of government committees that have separate legislative and executive branches. So I think you're, and I've always been concerned that committee member that's a citizen has the same voting capacity in those committees as an elected representative. And that's always been, in fact, we even wanted to distinguish that by saying, well, the committee board, three committee members that were council members and 2 that were citizens. We even tried to distinguish those 2 to try to distinguish the difference between those 2 people that were voting.
I would say it's fair to say that there were multiple times in the various committees where that distinction got blurred.
And then it was on clerk of the council who was voting for what.
That's right. I agree with that. George, and then I think we'll give Dave a second here, but personally, we'll give you the opportunity, but I think that becomes obvious to me that we have some further discussion that needs to take place. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to take, but I have a motion I'd like to bring forward here.
I'll be very brief. I'm very sympathetic to what Wayne is talking about. Whatever the resolution is, I think the city council is always going to govern better if it's listening to citizens. So if we can just make sure that those channels are open.
Yeah, and I would never want this to be perceived as putting a stop or damper on citizen input. I think we've been attempted to be very open and have lots of participation. I just worry that we're creating a vehicle which might cause us some real problems down the road.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to Dave.
Can we, just one final question?
Okay.
So just a couple of things. As a member of the Rules Committee, first of all, I wanted to apologize that it didn't occur to me, actually, that the administration would have an objection. I wasn't there at the meeting yesterday, but so I'm happy to bring this back, and I'd like to have further discussion.
Happy to do that.
Mayor Curtis, when I met with him, the subject of the budget committee came up frequently, and there were various concerns expressed, but I actually don't remember specifically the concern of that you shouldn't have citizens on the committee. So I apologize, I didn't pick that up, but that would be a concern. So I look forward to further discussion.
So your heartburn would be mostly with the mixed committee where they both vote, where we have citizens voting?
Well, I guess my concern is we're sort of entering into a slippery slope. So for example, we have a Transportation Mobility Advisory Committee, which spends a lot of time trying to get to issues. If the council were to go and create a separate citizens committee on transportation, for example, what role now does the mayor play, and should council members appoint a group which could likely have a different opinion than Transportation Mobility Advisory Committee? How do you reconcile two diverging opinions? And so my sense is that the answer to that question is that you use your advice and consent power, and if the recommendations from the mayor don't align with your vision of transportation mobility, just say no, to that appointment. But I think, again, when the minute we start bringing citizen committees in, while we still have a structure around how citizen committees are statutorily appointed, that just gives me concern. I see it as a potential spot of conflict later on. And I think it takes away the prerogative anticipated in our form of government that the mayor appoints and the council gives advice and consent. So that's my concern.
The neighborhood committee, citizens committee.
Well, I think I would argue that if you want the neighborhood committee established, we should put it in code. And define its relationship and define
It
its
is actually in
objectives.
code, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so again, that just my sense would be, if you want to create a citizen committee, let's explore putting in code, unless it's ad hoc. If it's a group that has a specific mission, you want them to address a specific question after which they dissolve, I don't think anybody has a concern about that. I think our concern really is around the idea of standing committees that could potentially upset the apple cart on with boards and commissions.
Very much. I'd like to look for a motion for this. Sorry. Well, Brian.
Well, I just wanted to ask you a question to make sure that I'm, so based on your last comment, are you saying that if part of this was a rule, that's what we've called in this draft citizen and mixed committees could only be ad hoc? Does that solve your problem?
Somewhat, although I still have concern that council committees, based on the current language of the code, should only be council members. And so if you wanted to appoint an ad hoc committee or group for some purpose, I don't think it should be a mixed group, number one. I think that sort of divide, it flies in the face of what we've had all along. Yeah, I think for a specific task for a specific time with a specific outcome, I don't think we have that serious of a concern.
But I'd like to move that we refer this item back to the Rules Committee for further discussion and direct that the administration is part of that discussion.
You have a motion, second, any discussion about that? Okay, I will call for a vote. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you
Thanks
for your input.
Thanks for inviting me.
I appreciate helping, working together and keeping on track here.
I can tell you, Wayne, from my understanding with the conversations with council members, there was never any intent. It was, how do we focus the efforts they're making? It was never an attempt to subvert the broader.
Understood. I just worried about the precedent. So.
I'm glad you raised it.
Okay, we'll move to item number 2, a discussion on council assignments for boards and committees. Would you bring that up, Cliff, or?
Bryce will bring it up for you. Do you want to bring up the spreadsheet first? That one, 2018.
This is last year's.
This is the current, yes, last year's, click 2018.
Now go back to the spreadsheet.
Oh,
There's a tab at the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So council members will recognize that this was sent out on a couple occasions. The latest version was last night. May I share?
Please.
So what we asked you to do was to identify which committees and liaison positions that you would be interested in. We ranked each section separately. So liaisons are ranked separately from the committees. Some we already know who's in certain positions. And so when the next chart that Bryce will bring up, I have filled it in based on this information, but there's some gaps and there's some things we need to clarify. But these are what the indications are. Councilmember Van Buren, we don't know what your preferences are, but and Mr. Sewell, we only have one for the liaison positions, but that's based on what we did. We also identified in that third column the number of council members that are needed, or even where we've been, and tried to get a sense of where we are for certain things. Library board, for example, we know that one was expired at the end of December. Mr. Harding has said he doesn't want to be reappointed for that one, so that appointment would be a 3-year term. And then the other one that's down there that's of interest is, I think we'll find it later. I think Kim Santiago is still on the Provo Housing Authority until the end of June. 2019, that's correct. So I wanted to show you how we filled in the next chart, but we need some clarification. So do you want to bring up the next one? So, okay, yeah, go down to the next one. So these first few have already been voted on by council or said in our code. Next page. Okay, so what we wanted to make clear was one of the things the Rules Committee had discussed was this idea of we often designate who the chair is, but we don't necessarily designate who a vice chair is. And when for instance, the Budget Committee, when Kim Santiago was finished and she'd been the chair, the question was, well, who's going to run the meetings? So the feeling was to do the first two names are the chair and the vice chair respectively. And so what I've got here is based on your preferences, but haven't really designated who's going to be the chair or the vice chair, or whether you're going to stick with 1 or 2 or 3 members. This is just based on what we've got. So one discussion that Rules Committee had was, but never came to a conclusion, was whether or not it would make sense to combine rules and policy governance into, say, a policy and rules committee, or just a governance committee or something.
After today's discussion, boy, I can hear a difference between the two. And I don't know if we're ready to combine them yet. Maybe, I thought we were at one point, but maybe we're not yet. I don't know. That's something we can talk about as a council.
And one consideration you want to make sure is that if you're going to have a committee, it's probably not ideal to have a committee of 1.
I actually think that is a bad thing in some cases. I can be one with staff support.
Yeah.
If there's one person that happens to be.
On an ad hoc basis, if you're given a task to try and identify a solution to, maybe, but I wouldn't make a standing committee as a one-person committee. So where we're at from my perspective now is to have the council members identify their wishes, and Mr. Chair, for you to designate who's going to be the chair and the vice chair of these committees, and then we'll just fill in the names
Can
accordingly.
the committees themselves, do I have to designate the committees themselves?
You don't, but typically that's the way we've done it.
Just have the chair designated?
Because at the end of this, you'll be asked to do a motion to approve
Okay, well,
committee
we can talk.
assignments.
I appreciate that. I would like those people on the committee to really be vocal about who they think the chair and the vice chair could be, and then we can vote about on it as a council as we do this forward. I think there are, first of all, I guess, are there any things that council members, you've seen the sheet? I don't know if everybody has seen that sheet as far as what they would like to do. Do you have any preferences for 2018 that have not been expressed? Is there anything that you would like to see go forward?
There's going to be there 4 members.
And we're gonna have a discussion about that.
Probably that big question mark on my name in some discussion.
And let's find case what that question mark has to do with the impact review committee. And that's a question, you and I have both served on that committee, and I don't know why the question mark's
The
there.
question mark is because you're both on the committee right now. The question is, in the new year, do you want to be on the committee still?
I don't see the problem.
I'd assume that, yeah. I just assume, probably for not sending that in, that we just continue with the same ones we've been on.
And there are other, George has joined us, and I'm sure he's got interest, and he expressed some of those interests, and I'm grateful for that.
But I think additionally, mine would be the Parks and Recreation Committee down there. I think it needs more members, doesn't it?
Now, we are not members of that board. I've been the liaison.
So this liaison.
That's all it is. We're not voting members of that board. That's
You're not
it.
gonna be able to do that now
I-
as chair, or?
I had that up there. I like the park.
Okay.
I don't want to give it up. I enjoy it. I have a great time there. And this does not mean that you and I had served together on the water board. Okay, I think you're the liaison, but I made a commitment to someone years ago that, it's a year ago that he says, would you make sure you get to go to those meetings? And I told Bart I would. And I think we worked well together on that as liaisons to the council. And so I don't think that we necessarily have to have one liaison, but I have thoroughly enjoyed my opportunity to be a liaison in many of those areas. And I don't want to, but if other council members really want that, there's some things that I can get.
So Bryce, we'll need to add a box near the bottom of the other table that has impact fee committee. And unless you two are wanting off, put their names up. And I don't think either one is a chair on that one. That's just,
No, Kay is the chair.
oh, is he? Okay.
Yeah, and I'm the vice chair. Right here. We do have an issue, and I think maybe this is the first one we ought to talk about, is the zoning committee.
Ad hoc.
It is ad hoc. Let's address the hard one first. We have a lot of council members that are really interested in being on this committee. And so I think it would be appropriate to begin with that discussion. And Dave, I'm gonna let you, Dave has put a lot of thought into this. It's all right. I'd like Dave to present a couple of ideas, and just give the council something to think about.
Thank you. Can we go back to the spreadsheet? And actually, I may ask to use the whiteboard in just a minute. So I appreciate Chair Winterton and how he presented this. I don't think we really have much conflicts across this except for zoning compliance committee, so it's probably a good one to start out with. I feel on a number of committees, the dynamics last year, there were times where there was some difficulty when the committees brought their recommendations to the council. There were times where the committee's recommendations weren't necessarily the majority view on the council, and that caused some difficulties. There's there's a lot of time that gets put in by the committee members, by staff, by the community in developing these recommendations, and so they do have a lot of momentum, and so it gets awkward when the recommendations don't necessarily align with the majority view of the council. I think in Robert's rules, when they talk about committees, they recommend that committees reflect or represent the broad views of the whole body as much as possible. And when that happens, then it's more likely that the recommendations coming from committee will have broad support from the council. Yes.
Okay, so I think the zoning committee took direction from the whole council, and the whole council voted on the package of recommendations that came from the administration and went forward on that basis.
Yes, and it wasn't. I'm speaking broadly and just in principles. And I don't want to litigate any of the specifics. Just talking broadly. So can we roll this up? Can I get to the board? So right now we've got a committee, and 4 council members have said that this is my #1 preference. I really want to be a part of this committee. And so I've spent some time thinking, like, what are the different options? I spoke with leadership, with Mr. Winterton about this, and we're just going to kind of throw out some different options and see what the council as a whole thinks. And obviously there's other permutations that you can come up with, but one kind of option would be to have a 2-member committee. So for example, I'm just going to use initials. You might have George Stewart and Dave Sewell on it, or George Stewart and George Hanley. Again, this is only polling from the 4 that said, hey, I really want to be part of this committee. Maybe Dave Connect and Dave Sewell, or Dave Connect and George Hanley. So there's different ways to split this and still try to strike a balance. So whatever, if the committee can come to a consensus on what they recommend, it might have less friction and awkwardness when it gets to the council. Another option might be to have a 3-member committee and have a chair. And since the chair kind of directs some of the discussion and sets the agenda or whatnot, you might do something where like Dave Sewell would be chair, and George Stewart and Dave Connect are other members. And again, just different permutations of that, or maybe Dave Connect as a chair, or George Stewart as chair. So that's kind of another different approach to it. This is not Gary Winterton's favorite proposal, but an option might be to take, who at least in my impression might be, I don't know how to say this diplomatically, just kind of more in the center of the question that is currently at hand, and have them as chair, and then you have 2 other council members from the 4 who expressed interest. So again, just looking to balance the committee. I guess I should probably when Mr. Winterton looked at this, he suggested maybe,
Eliminating that one.
yeah, not his preference. He also suggested perhaps that I could take on this, and so there might be some permutations with that. I was not one of the 4 that expressed interest in this, and considering other leadership responsibilities, it's not something I'm eager to take on. I'd rather put focus elsewhere. But if that's a compromise that the council really wanted to, I would be open to that. The last thought would be to have all 4 council members who expressed an interest.
Dave, are you talking about just the zoning committee specifically?
This is specifically the zoning committee. So I was talking about principles before, and so now how would those principles might apply to the zoning committee? Obviously, there's a whole lot of options here, but we felt like just addressing this head on. Let's get the council to weigh in on this.
This is the committee that's going to take some time here.
Yeah. So a couple things came out of the various rules discussions that we had. And so let me hit it in 2 parts. So the one part is if you have a committee of 4, then we have to have an open and public meeting. We have to notice it. Our minutes requirements are different than when we just had smaller committees where we just take some notes and then the committee comes back with some recommendations. That's a challenge. Robert's rules, and I think some of the other rules books rightly say that a committee should represent a variety of opinions. So not necessarily put all the like-minded people on one committee, but have a variety so you can work through the various issues. It was also commented in the Rules Committee that one of the things that our committees haven't been doing is that, regardless of the size and makeup of them, generally they've come back, they've identified various alternatives, and they've arrived at maybe a recommendation. But when we've come back and reported from the committees, we haven't typically said, by the way, the committee identified alternatives A, B, C, and D, and we think we should go with B because of this. We've just come back with B. And so the council as a whole doesn't necessarily get the opportunity to say, consider the 4 options and then give some direction back to the committee and say, we think you should go down that path. That I think would be perhaps a better procedure in terms of trying to get fuller input from the full council to make sure that the path you're treading is more in line with what the majority of the council wants. That's one option. But I want to just be very clear that that's one thing I think that we've missed. And then the other part is really down there. If we go down to a 4-person committee, you may as well open it up to the entire council, because we're going to have the open and public stuff anyway. Okay, so that's my thoughts.
I think one of the weaknesses before too is that the committee rules. I mean, they'll bring it back to council, and if they've already agreed for them, this is what it is. You're not even bring it to council, except for a vote. So I don't know. A couple weeks.
So I would just, when you said, bring back the options and have the council vote, and then the committee goes down that road. That's what we did. The administration laid out a plan, we discussed it, we gave the.
Oh, in zoning committee, you're right, but not all the committees operate that way. Sometimes a committee of 2 will come back and it's just a recommendation. This way we think we should go. Never discuss what we tossed off the table. That was a generic comment. With specific to this, and both my comments were really specific or generic to our whole committee process. Once you get to a committee of 4, the open and public meeting rules apply, and the procedures that we have to follow as staff are more comprehensive.
I really respectfully just say that for committee. Why do you even do that? That doesn't make sense to me. I get that. We don't need to bring it back to the council. The 4 council members have already decided, and they agreed on it unanimously. But I do think, it's important we have that discussion. George?
I have 2 comments. One is a question. I mean, if you're presuming that all 4 would vote unanimously, right, and in the case that they did, would that not then be? I mean, what I hadn't thought of is that would sort of be a de facto council vote. So I'd like to know what that means. I mean, on the other hand, I mean, maybe it means that there's a very brief discussion in the city council about it, and it's more straightforward. I don't know. But assuming that there would be lots of cases where there wouldn't be unanimous voting, I can see the benefit of having that fuller discussion. Also, I think in both scenarios, it does seem like it streamlines the citywide or the city council wide discussion at that stage. But I hadn't thought of this problem of if they all four vote in favor of something, does that somehow suddenly become de facto city council vote?
Well, no, in the sense that, I suppose it depends on your definition of de facto, right? It's not official in the sense that you're not taking that, if you're taking that vote in a committee meeting, you're not taking that vote in a meeting designed to actually create and effectuate policy. But it does, from both the public's perspective and perhaps from the other three council members' perspective, make it look like the decision has already been.
In the public's perspective.
But with four, it would be a public meeting.
And it would be the. Dave?
Thanks. So we had some great discussions with our DAPR committee where some developers who were very reluctant come in and really say anything, including different institutions, the LDS Church. We had a variety of people come in and be very frank about the process, which they would not have done in an open meeting with reporters present. So if we want a real committee meeting, we don't want the press there, and four will do that, and I think that's really valuable.
If one of us is willing to withdraw, then I think we should just have a committee of the whole for voting. It seems like, I think we're gonna miss what David says, we won't have some of the expert witnesses who would otherwise. But I don't like any other alternatives. Well, I like some, but they're not really fair. They like it because of my position. So I think maybe we should maybe go to committee of the whole and say, on zoning, since there's another one already, we'll just discuss it with the council. We'll discuss it, we'll have a committee.
Oh my God, Mr. Stewart. So of the four that are up there, I don't think the four would ask because all of the council's members that have expressed an interest get to participate. But if that's not acceptable, then we could actually, like you said, do it as a committee of the whole, bring the appropriate staff members into work meeting and have those discussions as a whole council. I do want to make a couple of other comments though about having our meetings public. I think, we've mentioned the scenario of if you have four on a committee, the decision can largely be made. I think that same concern applies even when there's only three, because you're just one vote away from a law at that point. There's a lot of momentum behind it. I think there is some value in an issue that has this much public interest being open to the public. Not necessarily for a public hearing, but so people, just like with me, we've got some interested citizens here. We're listening, and if they have concerns about what we're saying or doing, they can talk to us afterwards. I would love to see that kind of public openness on an issue that has this much interest. And just a couple of comments along that line. I was reading in the Utah League of Cities and Towns manual the other day, and David Church, who's the attorney for the Utah League of Cities and Towns, was discussing the Open Public Meetings Act, and this is his recommendation. The intent of this, referring to that act, is to include all committees, commissions, or other groups that may be carrying out anything that looks like the public's business if they are supported by public funds. It is clear to me that all advisory commissions or committees are to be included if they're officially set up by ordinance or resolution, even if they're only recommending bodies. Now, I trust that probably technically we're in compliance with this law, but I'm not sure if we are following the spirit and intent of it, particularly on an issue of this much interest to the public. The other,
Which issue? Oh, the zoning issue.
yeah, this is zoning issue. So the other concern that I have, and this goes back to Mr. Stewart's comment again, I really appreciated it. These first three options, somebody's gonna get left out, no matter how you slice it and dice it. And there's a principle, I discovered this reading in Mason's manual that's used for legislative bodies, particularly state legislature. It was a principle that a committee should not be able to exclude any member of the body from attending. Let me just read you briefly two comments here. This is section 629. Any member of a legislative body has the right ordinarily to be present at committee meetings and may request permission to express an opinion, but the member cannot vote unless give way to any member of the committee. And then the next one is the general rule is that a committee cannot exclude other members of the body from its deliberations. We go with number 1, 2, or 3. We're essentially excluding an interested member of the legislative body from even attending the meeting. And I think that's a problem.
So if they attend,
Becomes open.
doesn't it become open?
So we might as well.
Yeah,
So all committees would be open.
well,
This committee of 4 people attend.
No, if I want to show up with George and there's 2 committee members there, I can make anything could be open.
That means we have to notice it, and so you can't just show up.
Well, actually, if I show up and it's not noticed, you have to cancel the meeting.
well, that's a topic for another discussion. That there may actually be some advantage to that. If you know in advance that 4 or more council members want to attend, of noticing the meeting, I would support that based on this principle. But that's another discussion. All I'm suggesting is that on this particular issue that we either go with number 4 or as Mr. Stewart suggested, just go with the committee as a whole.
Okay, I think Mr. Sewell brings up a lot of interesting things, important things, and I think the Rules Committee should delve into that a little bit more and bring fuller proposals back. Very interesting things. And can I ask if there's any other suggestions from the council of things we might consider?
This is one of them, the committee of the whole.
Yep.
So going down the committee of the whole idea,
I withdraw.
what's that? You withdraw?
Withdraw.
Draw number 5 or withdraw?
He's going to go with the exoneration, not
Be on the committee.
What I wanted to say was, last year, this committee brought to council a strategic plan. And the council adopted the strategic plan, which had, I think, 7 or 9 parts to it. And theoretically, you could just have this, any work meeting or a committee of the whole, you could address those issues as the policies are starting to get fleshed out.
Cliff, I think there's still some value in committee meeting and having input from Coach David. I would withdraw Dave Kneskin with the chairman.
So we have a proposal for this option
I
with
move that we accept that committee as.
the chair here, and then we would still need to select a vice chair, but is there any concerns with that?
I don't have any concerns. I just want to express my confidence that we can work together on that. And I think there's enough common ground, at least from my short experience just in the last month and our last work meeting. I'm confident that we, even though we may not always agree on the means and methods, we have the same goals. And I think I'm confident that good can come from that.
We have a motion. We have a motion there. Is there a second?
Let me just bring it up.
Please.
I'm confident the council is going to make a decision.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That, I appreciate, that's very magnanimous, and I appreciate your, because this is very important to George, and so I really respect that he's willing to do that. We have a motion. Dave?
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion?
Bring up the other one.
this motion, can I just clarify that motion just a little bit then? And that would be that we are establishing a chair. We don't have established a vice chair with this. Can we establish a vice chair as a secretary? And I would suggest that we have George Henry.
I nominate George.
Okay, I was just about to.
Okay, as
That's
a
fine.
secondary,
Yeah, that's fine.
or whatever, is it, an alternative substitute motion, that would include George Henley as the vice chair, Dave Connect as the chair, and Dave Sewell as a member of the committee.
Could I recommend that part of that substitute motion includes that the statement of purpose remains the same from the year before?
Okay,
I think it's okay to have all the statements of purpose stay where they are unless you by motion change them.
okay. Any other discussion?
We'll second your substitute motion.
Okay. Those in favor? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, George.
So Bryce, if you don't have to put chair on there, if you just take George Stewart out and move Dave up to the star and put George above Dave Sewell, there's a note above that will clarify that that's what it means.
One other committee that I would like to get established, we have established, and I think I would really encourage a few members of the council. George Stewart and I have been on the budget committee with Kim Santiago. Kim's no longer here. George and I would both like to stay on it. I think with some of the things, I would like to give another council member an opportunity to be on that budget committee. And I know that we are going to be having some recommendations coming forward with, I think they can come through the rules committee with regards to this specific committee. And the administration is going to want to have some input on the budget and the budget committee. And so I think as we talk about this, I think it's important to do that, but at some point here, I would like to be able to give another council member. I've actually had the opportunity to be on, and I love it, be on it for 6 years. And I served on a budget committee before, and every year we've had a budget committee, I've had that opportunity, and it is an awesome experience. Is there anyone else that would really like to participate on that? Are you raising your hand to volunteer?
No.
Go ahead, Dave. You got some comment.
Just a thought, based on Mr. Parker's statements earlier, based on a lot of things that we've talked about so far this afternoon. I'm curious how the council would feel about putting it on hiatus for a couple of months until we can work out the proper structure, and so not assigning anyone to it in the time being.
We just don't need to meet for a couple of months before we work it out. I think it would be best not to take the offer.
How does the council feel about that? I think we're in a critical time with the budget, so I hate to just dump it completely. But on the other hand, I think that we are going to be evolving around this particular issue. If we have a meeting, George, if we feel like we need to have a meeting, can you and I handle it? And then Mayor Capucci.
I think that's good because we are planning to do, there will be some recommendations coming together.
Okay,
I'd be willing to serve on that committee if you need to.
and I would love to allow Kay that opportunity. And so I think as far as the committee goes, with the realization that we are evolving around this issue, but in the meantime, Kay would be willing to serve. I would love to allow him to take my place on that for right now. That would be my, I guess it.
Here, what about staying, having Kay on, and you staying?
And I would love to
I would
participate.
prefer the three of us.
I'm willing to do it. I do want you to be aware that there are challenges that for me at this point with time commitments. And I am willing to do that if you'll be a little bit.
That's right, let you give up the rec board here.
I'll let you take that too, Kay. But as we get going here, but if Kay is willing to do that, and if you'll be a little lenient with me, I would appreciate that.
We can be.
Thank you. Dave?
I guess my concern is depending on what the proposal is, what structures, if we decide on the structure of a budget committee, depending on how that's structured, will affect my preferences for council members to serve on it. And so I'm fine if this is, a 2-month thing or a 3-month or however long until we get the proposals. But I would hate to get a proposal and then say, ooh, I think a different makeup would be better, but we're not willing to.
No, I think that we will look at the evolution of this and see and make up the committee to best serve the city.
So,
I was more than willing to bring it back.
so do we need a motion that says we're sustaining this particular arrangement as a temporary arrangement until we get the recommendations from the mayor and we reconsider the constitution of that committee?
Yeah, I think we can have that, or we can just actually just constitute our budget committee with the realization that that's going to take place.
The only change that needs to occur is to not have the citizens vote.
Yeah.
And I think
That would change the whole makeup of the committee. Right now, they can vote, taking that away, then I think they go to the administration. So that's what we can discuss.
yeah, if that's all right, we'll add Kay to that, be lenient with me, and we'll have this evolve, our business council. That would be my proposal.
Who would like to be the chair and the vice chair on that committee?
George, my motion would be that George Stewart be the chair, the Kay Buren be the vice chair. I get to participate as I have the ability.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that?
I'll wait for after the vote. I have one more point of discussion, but.
Okay. We'll call for a vote then. Those in favor? That is unanimous. And I appreciate that, Dave.
It sounds like the administration is putting together a proposal. I think the rules committee, I'd ask the rules committee to consider, maybe not necessarily a counter proposal, but think about what's the best form for this committee. And then I'd actually even ask the 3 members that were just put on to think about, having heard all the discussion today, what in your opinion would be the best form going forward? Just so we can have different ideas out to discuss and choose one.
I think my opinion is right in line with the administration stuff, frankly. I think there's a problem having citizen voting. I think Wayne's point is good, and it's really different than we do. I love having them vote, but I think it's not the way it's organized nationally or statewide. We probably need to make a change. Probably where I'll come from.
Okay.
Any other discussion? We'll get together and we'll talk about it. And I think the rules committee needs to be involved with the administration in the formation of this type of committee so that we can just be on the same page. Okay.
Can we go back up and figure out the policy and the rules committees? Right now we have 1 of 2 and 1 of 1. And it's fine to have 2, just as long as that's what you want.
2, we have 2 on
Go to the
policy.
top, Bryce.
Right, you raise
Move
that.
up to the policy and governance committee. Okay. So you don't have to have 3, but it's really good to have at least 2.
Policy governance, it's actually Dave Connect, not Dave Harding.
For policy, sorry, I've made my preference.
If this sheet is for preference.
Yeah.
I would like to see Dave Connect stay on this policy governance committee.
Maybe 3 of us.
The 3 could, Dave has such a background on the general plan that I think it'd be critical to keep him on that policy governance committee.
Just the reason why I'm interested in this is I looked at one of our 9 priorities from the past was structured policy. And if someone asked me, like, what are policies that the council has voted on that are still current, that we're still following, I wouldn't know where to go to find those. I wouldn't be able to point someone and say, well, these are the things. I mean, I could say, well, sometime last year we voted on the West Side development policies. And I think those are, we're still committed to those, but, and you go back a year before, but like which ones are still enforced, which ones do the administration, consider still our policies or whatever. So I think policy governance committee would be the best committee to maybe look at structuring that. And
If you want to be on that committee, I'm fine with that. willing to stay on that committee. But we definitely want you were on it. I would like you to stay on it personally.
Motion.
That's a motion.
Do you want to designate chair, vice chair as
I've been
you?
the chair. I'm glad to allow, I think Nate's been on it. He knows what we've been doing.
I don't necessarily want to be chair of too many committees, so.
Okay. Is there a recommendation from the council as far as chair goes? That committee?
I'd be happy to. I mean, and I mentioned the one, there's one other thing, and I guess I kind of wanted to mention just to see if the council felt like it would be best handled by that, but I have some passion and vision where I'd like to see this go, so I wouldn't mind being chair, but.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. Dave?
Yeah, I was thinking on housing, I might want to be housing chair, so I'm just trying to pick and choose.
I appreciate that. Put your name on that. And the recommendation would be to switch this around so that Dave Harding's the chair. We're comfortable with me being the vice chair since I've already been on it. And good thing. I'll be vice chair and make sure that Dave connects me and put up there as a representative. Council Rules Committee. I know you talked about maybe that's on your list here.
Yeah, no, I'd like to stay. I'd like to stay.
Is there another council member that we? Oh, excuse me. Before we move on, we better vote. Thank you.
You don't necessarily have to vote. You can vote at the very end for everything.
Let's do that. Let's get some of these names up. Is there another council member that would be willing to serve on the Council Rules Committee?
Who enjoys a good geeky discussion?
I have thoroughly enjoyed the Rules Committee, and I wish I could stay on it, but I don't feel like I can time-wise.
What do we have left to do?
Actually, not a lot at the moment. So we were actually envisioning that it might be a little bit internet. I mean, this kind of thinking I think the committee issue, but I'm not sure that we'll necessarily have something right away after that.
Okay. Well, let's put Dave Connect. Somebody want to make a motion for those?
I move that Dave connects, or Dave Sewell serve as chair and Dave Connect as vice chair of the.
Okay. You know what, I was out of order. We're gonna wait to do this, but this is a good thing to
Okay.
get it. Then let's get it written in, and then we'll ask for a motion on all these down the
Okay.
Housing Committee. These were the people that expressed interest. Kay is the chair of that committee. Are you the Kay?
No.
Dave Connect. Okay.
Sounds like Dave Connect would like to stay as chair.
Any problem, any challenges or anything we want to change around this committee?
Oh, sorry. I was trying to update the spreadsheet. I'd like to be on the committee. That was, or housing committee. That was one that I put my preference in on.
And we've got 3 committee members.
I haven't been very active on it. You can take my place.
Comfortable with that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you already want chair, vice chair, regular member?
You want, George?
I don't have a preference.
I'd like to be the regular member.
Okay.
I'll go vice chair.
Okay, then you got it
I would
right
like
then.
Dave Connect to be chair. I'll be vice chair.
Okay, there we go. Move on to the next committee. Are we
Runner or roll?
Any question about the neighborhood review committee? Anyone like to?
Can I talk about that one for a minute?
Yes.
So that committee has been looking at making some changes to the neighborhood program. Most of those changes were affected. I think in November or December, we passed an ordinance, made some changes and created essentially a mixed committee, neighborhood advisory board with 3 members of council, up to 3 members of council, and a number of members of the community. And so one of the questions I have is whether or not we need to have the neighborhood program review committee continuing forward and finish off the changes that still need to be looked at as a neighborhood advisory board, or keep 2 separate boards. But in either case, we still need to designate which members of council are going to be on the NAB. And the NAB, by ordinance, the chair will be a council member.
Yeah, I would say that the NAB functions with the council member as chair and as we envision it, should be able to take care of the loose ends that the neighborhood committee went through.
So would that mean that we eliminate this committee?
The NPRC, yeah, you would eliminate it. It was ad hoc anyway.
Ad hoc anyway? How comfortable are we with as council members doing that, eliminating this? Is there any?
So, just to help me get up to speed, so neighborhood advisory board will have 3 council members, or is it 2?
Between 1 and 3.
Between 1 and 3. Okay,
And then the committee itself, the board itself is designated to have as many as 9, but only 3 members of council as a maximum. And then all 5 area board members. And then the difference is the difference in council. So if you have 3 plus 5, you'd have maybe 1 other person at large from the community. If you had 1, you'd have 3 people at large from the community.
Okay, with that situation, Mr. Stoll, go ahead.
Now, just to clarify, we already passed this, right?
Yes.
And I just wanted to make sure I don't recall an objection from the administration on that one, because that was a little different and it was in code.
And I think it's because it's always been the council's program.
Right.
No, that's not true.
It's not been?
It used to be the mayor's.
Okay, well, it's currently the council's
I-
program.
But it's the council.
Okay, okay,
So I think,
That's where it belongs.
okay.
I think what we're proposing is to just move Mr. Beck and me down, and unless others would like to take a turn.
I agree with that. Is it any further discussion on those 2?
we talked about this at one point, and I don't remember in which committee meeting I was when we had this conversation, but I thought either 1 or 2 other days kind of brought up that they felt like there were still some items that were probably better handled by the review committee rather than the advisory board. Was I mistaken on that? That changed?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's.
Okay.
Okay, you can eliminate that. The proposal is right now, we'll vote on these after to eliminate that. Development review process.
Bryce, just cross it out for a minute.
Okay.
Until they vote. You don't have to resurrect it.
Okay,
So who's the chair of this one?
Is there a third
Just like
person to
that.
join them?
anybody else want to be on that committee? I think we're comfortable with what we've got right there. I am.
Okay.
Development approval process committee, ad hoc,
We're almost done. We're waiting, right?
We're winding down. We have a meeting scheduled for like 5 months from now. We had another issue that came up that we'll be meeting on soon, but it's kind of intermittent at this point.
I would suggest that we leave it as is and allow them to finish up and then report back to the council and see whether they want to be dissolved themselves.
So Dave, one of the things that Karen's been grappling with is this noticing and scheduling meetings and where are we gonna have the meetings, like in this, the school district is wanting to charge money and logistics of how to work with the developer, get the meetings done, coordinate who pays for flyers, I mean, all those little things, but boy, when a neighborhood chair is going loggerheads with the developer and they're both upset, I think we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
Or as minimal as possible. So there's a discussion for that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Do we need a vice chair on that?
We've got who, are we leave, that would mean that Dave Sewell, the chair, Dave Connect, right now, the way it's written. Vice chair.
I guess I'm okay with that.
Okay. Next one down.
Okay, so now, you've already talked about that one. So now you're down to the library, the impact fee.
I think we talked about this.
We talked about that.
I'm comfortable with staying where we're at. Kay, how about you? Okay, next one, library board, we need.
So the library board is appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the council. There's, by city code, one of the members of the board must be a member of the governing body, i.e. a member of the council. So I think all that you need to do in this meeting is if somebody has interest in being that person, you might indicate that to the mayor so that she can make her recommendation as to who she wants to appoint.
Having served on that, it's every other month meeting. The workload is not a lot. I would love to stay on it. It conflicts with leadership meeting when that happens. So that's the reason why I'm not asking to be reappointed. It's not because I didn't enjoy it. It's very enjoyable.
Anyone want to volunteer? Dave, that's a nice hand. I like to say thank you. And we will, Mayor,
Yes.
that is a recommendation, Council, and we will,
Fantastic.
and we'll have that come, we'll look to hear from you.
Will you just put it recommended?
And Deputy Mayor Isaac Paxman is over the library, so that's one of his departments he's over.
Thank you.
Okay.
Um,
That next one's statutory, this one's inactive. And then here's all the liaison assignments that you've got, all these names are based on in the spreadsheet who indicated interest.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, can I just say? I'm not.
George is very interested.
I'm eager to serve, but I was just, when I think that was based on an email response that I said, hey, these things all interest me. I will say I'm already functioning as the Rock Canyon Advisory Committee liaison and the Sustainability Committee liaison, or unless Dave was officially, you were sort of officially functioning as that, actually.
I had been, but you definitely got the expertise. for
My
that, so.
my sense is that those are two things that whether I want to or not, I'm going to get roped into those conversations, which I'm more than happy to do. So that's kind of where I probably should put my energy in terms of these.
Okay, let me go with where I'm at on this. Parks and, I'll start with the airport board. I love that. I'm willing to continue to do that. Arts count, energy board, I think it's important that I stay there at this point with the opportunity I have to work with UMPA and as a member of the governing board of directors on the APPA. I think that would be an important one for me to stay on. Parks and Rec.
So you can take my name off of that energy board.
And George has been such a critical part of the energy board. He, over as a chair, as a member of the board and council, I think we can do okay together on that.
I mean, at some future point, I'm
Awesome.
interested, but.
Can I just make one comment? At least with respect to what the first five, airport, Arts Council, Energy Board, TMAC, and Parks and Rec, those are all statutorily created boards that have open meetings anyway. So if the entire council wanted to show up to one of their meetings, there's nothing preventing you from doing that.
That's
They're
true.
already public and openly noticed.
Thank you, appreciate that.
This, however, was intended to be the designated liaison or liaisons for the council.
With the Parks and Rec board, I've been willing to, I'm willing to continue on. I thoroughly enjoy those meetings, and I'm sure Scott, anybody can come with those four there, with those three there. I'm sure that we'd all be invited. Is there any concern about people wanting their name on there or not wanting their name on there? It's George, okay?
Can I just go back to the TMAC thing? I'm willing to let someone else do that if someone wanted to. My name just appeared there more than I think I could handle.
Okay, okay. Arts Council, let's just go down the list. Dave, Arts Council, you willing to do that?
Yes, we haven't had a liaison down, and that's just kind of getting
Okay.
from my hand, so I'd love to do
Thank
that.
you. Let's see, we'll go to Energy Board. I think we got there. George Ham, the TMAC. Anybody else want to be the representative with, or George, do you not want to do that?
Well, I'm just sort of, that's 4 committees there that my name is on, and that's more than I had in mind, so.
George, I think there's another problem there. Isn't that conflict with your work meeting? Second Tuesdays of the year?
It does, yeah. Actually, I can't go to that, thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else that would be willing to take on the TMAC?
That's my schedule better than. Yeah, that's the only block of time once a month that is not really
And
negotiable.
again, this is a liaison, it's not a voting member.
They're a lot, there's not as much workload for them. I might be willing to volunteer for that, but let me ask one other thing. It's not on this list, I imagine it's down below, but the ULCT Legislative Policy
That's
Committee.
lower too, yeah.
If I'm on that, then I'd be less willing to volunteer for some of these others. If I'm not on that, then I would be willing to say jump into TMAC. So could we answer that question first?
So scroll down to the bottom there, Bryce. So this committee is required, under the Utah League of Cities and Towns bylaws, there's no more than 3 people from a city that are allowed. 2 are elected officials, only 1 may be a staff member. So traditionally at the city, it's been the mayor plus either Wayne or Corey the last several years, and then somebody from the council.
Just based on our breakfast where we brought up a bunch of ideas and they said, okay, great, let's send it through ULTC. Great, send it through ULTC. CT. That made me think that this is probably something that's fairly important. We need to make sure that someone's there and committed to it and willing to do it. And we've lost Ms. Santiago. So that's something that I guess I have some interest in. I'm a little wary of it, but a little interest in. I don't know if other people are.
Let me tell you how those meetings go.
Yeah.
To help. So typically they'll broadcast them and you can just watch it on your computer and you can vote and participate that way. They usually have some kind of chat side of
When
the
do they have those meetings?
Mondays at noon typically. Sometimes they'll have a breakfast meeting, but typically what they do is every Monday during the session.
And then monthly outside of the session?
Yeah, as monthly or as needed.
Any council member that's interested in that? You want to do it? Do it.
I'm willing to. So,
Okay,
okay. And I will.
and that brings us back to TMAC then. The liaison. Anyone have an interest in that?
Bryce, take George off because he can't do it anyway.
I think maybe no one's going to talk about that right now. We'll bring it back. Parks and Rec. George, can we take you? You're welcome. Any of you are welcome to come to this meeting. It is an open meeting. George, okay if we take you off of that? Okay, if you want to be on, you have your name listed there. It's up to you too.
We're just trying to get it down to 2.
I'll get it down to 2 or 1.
I'd like to come, but I don't necessarily know that I will be
It's,
able to come
we
every
usually
time.
have that meeting Thursday at noon.
Every week? Or
No, monthly.
Third Thursday.
I don't know what your schedules are, but that's usually when it's.
You can list me or not, I'll just try to come.
Okay. Okay, what do you want?
Let's just stay. I mean, you're trying to get rid of one of us?
No.
I didn't mean that negatively, I just meant.
Okay, let's just leave it. We'll just leave it as is.
So one of them that's not up here that I've been going to all along is the Agricultural Commission.
That's not an official committee of ours, is it? It's on the committee, but we have a liaison. We kind of thought that was under sustainability.
The subcommittee of sustainability.
We can always amend,
Okay.
add people if you haven't got any clarity on some of these later.
Can we come back to this? I think we've spent about as much time as we did. Do you want to talk about Utah Clean Air Task Force?
I have been going to that for a while, but the mayor's office usually has been covering that pretty well, so I kind of felt like it was redundant for a council member to go as well.
Okay.
Unless somebody really.
And I think
Is that going to continue to be the case?
Mayor, are you going to continue to send some of these out like Clean Air?
We already have someone.
Okay, great. Let's just.
Who goes?
Isaac goes,
Okay.
and actually I've been telling him to work me in every third, so they'll go 2, I'll go 1.
Great.
CDBG General Committee, Dave Harding's on that right now. Anyone else?
I have not been on, but I did express interest in that.
Dave, Connect, have you been on that, or
I've done the social services.
you want, you know?
Yeah, it's not a year-long thing.
It's just seasonal. It's seasonal.
So yeah, take my name off of the social services.
Okay.
The question mark was simply because on the spreadsheet, there was a question mark, and I know David's been on it before.
You okay, Dave? I guess we have a list here. Counselor.
There's a couple more here.
Oh, Lord. Keep going.
Metropolitan Water Board is, I had Kay as last year, and I didn't know if he hadn't indicated, so if Kay wants to stay on, I would just take the strike through off.
How long does Laura stay on? Like, the ice sheet.
Yeah, it's on your side.
Laura, see, I think Laura still has some time. I think that's an appointment, isn't that right there?
It is.
And I don't think that that's something that has to be a member of the council, and Laura had a special interest in that, and I feel comfortable with leaving her there. So,
Bryce, would you put question marks on all three of those dates under term expiration, and we'll clarify what those are?
She has been reappointed, I just don't remember what the new expiration.
I think that's
Yeah.
right.
That's my intent, is to figure that out.
And ask her, she might be ready for a change. It's,
She did have a special interest in the skating issues, and so that's why she was put on in the first place. But and as the chair, I think at one time it was the chair, and I think that anyway.
So council members, there's a few more down here. Provo Housing Authority, Kim Santiago is appointed till the 2019. Do you want to keep these two people for downtown Provo? Gary Winterton and David Harding.
I don't think that's my current assignment, but I have expressed interest in it. I would love it. Since they're open, I'll just show up occasionally maybe, and then if you want to.
That's fine. I've had an interest. I am also a downtown business owner, and so that's had a special interest for me.
So, Mr. Chair, I think you're ready for a motion to approve the committee appointments and liaisons.
I'm on a steering committee for the west side, and is that just administration? Is that?
That's different. That's different. That's a staff initiated committee.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, Kate, because I think it's important that we recognize some of these other committees that people are working so hard on. Okay, we've got a template here at some point, or looking for a motion on this.
Motion to approve all the appointments and the liaisons as stipulated on this document.
Make that motion.
Thank you, George. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, George. Those in favor? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Man, thank you for all the work that you do. This represents a commitment and a lot of work that goes in, a lot of time and a lot of effort. Council, thank you. And Mayor, thank you for all the help that you do for us. This is great. Okay, now, next item. That took a long time, and we are behind, folks, so. Let's move on to item number 3. Discussion on proposed franchise agreement. Now, how much time are we able to make a 5-minute item? Go for it.
Okay, so we've been in negotiation quite some time to renew Comcast franchise agreements. And we have finally come to an agreement. Their prior agreement was entered into in 2003, was a 5-year agreement. We've been doing month to month for the last 10 years almost with Comcast on their franchise. So it's been a real breakthrough to finally come to terms with it. I've sent out a memo on kind of some of the high points of the agreement, but it is a 25-page agreement, so obviously it only covers so much. But it would be a 10-year agreement that would authorize Comcast to enter the public right-of-way. It's not to go through the normal permitting process and follow the city code in regards to that, but it would allow them to, to enter the city right-of-way. So I don't know if there are any questions on that, but I'd like to entertain them now.
Okay, so not only does it allow them to enter the right of way, but it also, there's some commitments that are made on our side, if I was reading that right.
Yeah, like any contract, there has to be consideration. So there has to be an exchange of a promise for a promise. So they're promising to do certain things, we're promising to do certain things. There are commitments on both sides. That's correct.
Right. So the one that kind of stood out to me, just I bumped into a Google person who just mentioned, hey, 7 years is starting to come up, and we should probably start discussing what we want to do at the end of those 7 years. And I just wanted, is there anything in this contract that might tie our hands a little bit as far as what we might want to do in the future with an asset that we built and used to own?
If you're referencing iProvo that we sold to Google Fiber, this doesn't relate to iProvo at all, in a sense that it follows the same format as the Google Fiber franchise agreement with some changes, but it doesn't have anything to do with the iProvo network. It has to do with Comcast and its equipment.
Right. It was more some of the restrictions or some of the things we were agreeing to is, basically that we wouldn't give any special arrangements to other. And I don't know if that's just
right. So pursuant to federal law, we're not allowed to provide more favorable treatment to one competitor over another. So when we were dealing with Google Fiber and we entered an agreement with them, and then in 2013, and then 5 years later in 2018, we want to enter into a renewal agreement with Comcast on their franchise agreement. We can't treat Google Fiber more favorably to the extent that they're in a similar situation than we're treating Comcast. And so anything in this agreement would obviously that would apply reciprocally. So anything here, we couldn't treat Comcast more favorably than Google Fiber, but I don't see this agreement as being anything that's more favorable to Comcast to the extent that they're similarly situated as Google Fiber than Google Fiber.
Thank you.
Mayor.
So I'm meeting with Google next week because they just they're ready to take the next step. And so I'm wondering, Brian, legally, is there anything that we need to be concerned about? I see that they're asking for 10 years, which they've never asked for that much before. And are we ready to commit to 10 years? And
I don't know necessarily why we wouldn't. There's been several, we've got franchise agreements with every telecom company, or at least negotiating franchise agreements with every telecom company. And it's not unusual for them to be 10 years long. It makes it easier for all of us to not have to go back and revisit it. I guess interesting thing, and I don't, maybe we need to sit down and have a meeting about that. I'm kind of at a loss as to what the Google discussion is about, since once the 7 years are up, they just own the network. So I think
then the free Google Fiber goes away.
Right.
So then
it can go away. That's a business decision for them to make. They're obligated to give it to us for 7 years. Once the 7 years are up, they can decide to do whatever they want with regard to that.
Okay.
So I don't think the two are interconnected in any way, other than that if you pass this tonight and a month from now, we renegotiate the Google franchise agreement for some reason and give them something that Comcast doesn't have, Comcast is going to come back and ask for it. And we probably have to give it to them. We probably have to give it to them whether you pass this franchise agreement or not, based on federal law. Unless, like the 7 years of free internet, we can articulate why they're in a different situation.
Thank you. That was the answer to what I was wondering.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
I look forward to hearing about your discussion with Google. Okay, this will appear tonight on the consent agenda, as it is stated right now, and you will notice that if for the public, if anyone wants to discuss this, it will be appropriate to do so during the open public comment. I don't think we have anything, need any motions since it's already on the consent agenda. Okay. Anything else the council wants to talk about that? If not, we'll move on to number 5.
All right, council, I just wanted to get up and briefly, Don Jarvis has sent out,
Wait, it's 04, I skipped number 4, I apologize, go ahead.
sorry,
We're on number 4, not number 5.
sorry, I didn't hear you. All right, so I just want to give some information about the LeRay McAllister Critical Land Conservation Program. If you had a chance to look in at this sheet that Don Jarvis has sent out, there's some information on here regarding it. And tonight, the council will be considering a joint resolution urging sustained support and increases in the annual state budget allocated to the LeRay McAllister Fund. And so the LeRay McAllister Fund, it was established in 1999. And it provides grants to local government, state agencies, and nonprofit organizations to conserve or restore important agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, watersheds, recreational lands, and culturally or historically important lands. The fund is administered by the Utah Quality Growth Commission. And since '99, the commission has approved 109 projects to conserve or restore more than 90,000 acres of Utah's critical lands. It's spent about $23 million, and the grants have been made in 22 of the 29 Utah counties. And so we have Don Jarvis here if you have any questions. If you don't have any questions, we will be hearing this item tonight and can go into more depth at that point.
This is the resolution I'm assuming will be presented tonight?
Yeah, the joint resolution will be presented tonight.
I've got 2 paragraphs that I probably can't support.
Okay.
Down on line 31 and 32, where it says, whereas farm preservation is a shared undertaking, is incumbent upon the state, counties, and cities to help compensate farmers. I just think that's just too open and blank for me to just say we're going to help. I think this is having to do with the McAllister Fund, which is funded by the state. I didn't feel comfortable to say, okay, if you do it, we'll do it too. Specific issues. So I don't like that paragraph. 2 paragraphs lower, it's the last line, let's see, it's line 42 and 43. It says, we also support all other measures that will advance our state's critical interest in securing food security for our current residents and future generations. I just think that's just way off encompassing. I'd like to see what they are before I say support anything that comes.
So logistically, it's probably easier for staff if you make a motion to remove those right now, and then if it passes, we can do that before and have a final version for you tonight, knowing whether that's in or not. But Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Jarvis wants to make a comment if you decide to allow it.
Thank you. Yeah, I will, Mr. Harris. I wonder if it's possible, you're up to include deleting some sense to the whole paragraph.
No, I entertain that, yes.
So like in the first one, we say that if the incumbent upon the state, counties, and cities to help compensate farmers, we could strike cities, and even counties too if we want, but I think the state does have an obligation.
And well, I think we're addressing the state's obligation with the.
Exactly, that's why
we're not committing the county and the city.
and we could strike, we could, if you want, you could change something on that last sentence on the line 41, 42. Maybe we also support, maybe instead of just strike all, or just support.
What if we just said, we believe it is important to, we believe that securing food security is important to our future. It's just a statement of principle. It's not binding any.
For any particular measure.
You already had that in 27 though.
I think it's, yeah, that's true.
Oh, just strike that last sentence.
Strike the last sentence.
That we all support.
That's fine. That was just frosting.
The frosting was just a little too thick, Don.
Just trying to get on the good.
So I'll make a motion to strike those two sentences as we just discussed.
sentences, so the words, see, we don't, not completely a sentence, it's counties and cities, taking that out and striking the last sentence.
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion on the motion.
Line 32. I'm wondering if we said something like, it's incumbent upon the broader community to help compensate farmers. So we're not, I hate, I don't like that as a city, we're saying it's your responsibility, state. I mean, yes, that's what we're talking about here, but I'd rather just talk about how, you know, whether it's the state or the county, it's the responsibility of the broader community to compensate farmers.
We could just change that phrase to, we call upon the state to help compensate farmers. Or we ask the state or something like that.
Comfortable with that?
I would be, yeah.
You know, when you say it's the broader community, we are the state.
Okay.
It's our money.
So I like Cliff's wording. What was it again?
We call upon the
We ask the
state.
state, call upon the state.
And yeah, that's.
Any other concerns? Are we able to deal with this? Okay,
So we'll amend it with that.
okay, so we have,
Yeah, there should be an and there.
No end on
Not
that.
the end.
At least that's what my editing. But maybe where.
Okay. Mr. Jones, are we,
Function.
What's that?
so this now we have to move, we ask for a motion to,
Well, ask Mr. Van Buren if his motion, if he'll amend his own motion to include these changes. And he already said that.
the
So
second,
then the second still stand for
the
Mr.
second
Stewart?
still stand, George. Okay, we have a motion to accept this as it has been rewritten. Those in favor? Okay, and this will then be brought forward tonight. Okay, item number 5. Doug, thank you.
I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight or this afternoon about some of the issues, background and information that exist up at Timp-Kiwanis Bounous Park. We gave a similar presentation to the Board of Directors of the Provo City School Board, and we wanted to also update this body as well, because a lot of these issues involve both legislative bodies. I'll be followed by Thomas McKenna, our projects manager, who will talk a little bit about potential details and mechanics of a conversion process, and then he'll be followed by our director, Scott Henderson. We'll talk about some potential elements that could go into an agreement between Provo City and also the Provo School District, as well as a path forward. It's probably best to start out with what really brought our two groups together. And there are two major issues: land and water conservation fund, and then some Title IX space issues with the school district. Back in 1967, this property here was purchased by Provo City under the old community school program, where schools were developed and parks were placed next to those schools. The grounds and a lot of the programming at the schools were also administered through the same department with Parks and Recreation. Over the years, these two groups have separated and had and followed their own different objectives. But I think in 1967, no one probably could have estimated the space requirements needed for today's educational programming. And so it's caused some issues here, because over time, with the development of the high school baseball field on that site and some other uses. We've been notified that the funds that were used to purchase this property, which are federal funds, land and water conservation funds, have specific requirements. And some of those are that it must remain open at all times to public use, no exclusive uses, and they're really very quite specific about school uses and making sure those stay separate at this point. So at this point, we've been notified by our state representative who manages the program for the feds that we're out of compliance and we don't qualify for any additional grant funding, which is a real problem for us because we've been successful in obtaining grants for trail projects over the past couple of decades. This is a real problem for Parks and Recreation. We'd like to resolve these issues, and we've been notified that until further notice, we don't qualify for any funding until we resolve this. The school district, on the other hand, they have, and Superintendent Rattel and his representatives could probably better speak to this, but they have some, bottom line, some special space needs that need to be addressed. Again, back in '67, I'm sure no one thought that a high school would need 40 acres that they do today, as evidenced over at Provo High School. In this area, they're really, they're needing space and they just don't have it. They also have some Title IX issues, which are laws that require equal facilities for boys and girls sports programs, and that those be handled equitably and fairly. And they've contacted us and let us know that they've got some issues with Title IX that they need to get resolved. So because of that contact, it kind of brought both groups together, and we thought that only by working together can we resolve both our mutual issues and come out winners on both sides. And so we intend and hope to partner with the district and come up with some form of an arrangement where these parcels can be converted. And Thomas will talk about that conversion process.
Thanks, Doug, for that introduction. So with that, this conversion process that this property is required to go through is federally and state regulated, according to these Land and Water Conservation Fund regulations. With that said, the appraisal that this property will go through is a highest and best used appraisal. It's called a Yellow Book appraisal. And the appraisal that has been done on this has determined that the highest and best use for this property is residential development. So that's what the value of this property is going to be based on. There has been discussion, once and if and when this property is sold, how can those funds be used? There's been talk about, possibly using these funds to build the Canyon Road Park to the northwest. Unfortunately, according to regulations, those funds cannot be used in that manner. They have to be used, they're required to be used to purchase land. And that land has to be unsubscribed. It cannot be part of a master plan. So we are in the process of negotiating and looking at land in the southwest side of Provo to convert this and to allocate that funding to and acquire that property. Again, the property will have to have public recreation access to it at all times. And that also the sale of this property will be contingent upon this conversion process going through. So there's some environmental assessments that we're working on that have to be completed, and also we need to get much closer to acquiring property to replace this with. So anyway, I'll turn the time over to Scott to go over the rest of our presentation.
So as part of, and we're joined by Stephanie Bryant, Business Administrator for the school district. So appreciate your help in any part of this as we're talking about to the council about whether or not to go forward on creating a memorandum of understanding. So as part of that interlocal agreement, the price would have to be what the Yellow Book comes from. And some of these other terms that we've talked about as part of the memorandum of understanding with the school district have come from both meetings with the neighborhood and intent statements from the neighborhood about some of the things that they would like to have protected. School use of the fields obviously would be there, but no rentals. And then it would stay open to the community and specifically the neighborhood. Student athletic purposes would be defined for the site, and this becomes important if we want to change, if the school district want to change the use of that site after they own it, then we have a process which you see at the bottom for any change of use, which involves most likely the municipal council only. It would move the pavilion to a more convenient location closer to the playground. The school district would commit to maintain the children's playground. A recent development, a lot of this with discussion started about the Title IX issue with the girls softball team. And where this, a change that happened recently is that the school district has agreed to put the girls softball on their actually property that they own now. And then it would be the practice soccer field that would go on to the Timp-Kiwanis Bounous park site. So that maintains a lot more of the integrity of the site. And I'll show you a map of that soon here. It really puts the school district responsible to secure access road gate to their site and their areas. This seems like somewhat of a minor issue, but Parks and Recreation receives a call every single year about people who has access to the gate, and they're going to do and to support school district activities. So we've been kind of acting as a middle person to where now that would clearly define who is has responsibility for that access gate. Clear delineation of any easements. We do have a well house on the site, so that easement would have to be maintained. And then, you know, what I talked about, that this process would be owned by both government organizations, both the school district and the city of Provo, for any changes of use that came out of this agreement to protect it. So this is a schematic drawing of what's proposed looks. You can see that, you know, this is currently, as was shown in the earlier maps, you know, already on the school district property line. So it brings the girls softball on here. And then what this does, and I thought this was a good suggestion, I think, that came out of the city council and the neighborhood, that because they talked about protecting Frisbee, ultimate Frisbee on that site. So this actually creates a field that is probably more appropriate, that probably the ultimate Frisbee players didn't like working around numerous trees in their area. So we feel like this improves and maintains the integrity of the site, and then helps both sides solve some pretty big issues at this site that, you know, this decision came long before our time, and maybe even at that time had no idea that it was non-compliant. But when that baseball field was built on this property site, that's what kind of created this problem. And that field is still needed, and the school district needs. So I think this kind of brings us to the more, I guess, we think that it still protects the park environment that is very important to the neighborhood, but also allows some flexibility for the school district to keep and maintain some of the facilities and cover the issue that they may have. So this is just about whether or not the municipal council wants us to move forward on this process and go forward with a memorandum of understanding. And I know Wayne Parker's been working hard on coming up with that memorandum that, if we do decide to go forward, that would be vetted and sent out to the neighborhood, so they would go towards their review. We would be, whether or not we have the power to execute the agreement, then it would go as surplus property, you know, as we would go through that process. And then we would hear from the public at that time, and then we move forward on the process. And we are still in the application for mitigation process, because as part of Land and Water, we do not have the new site locked up. So there are still some elements through the federal government permitting process that we have to go through. Stephanie, anything to add to this?
No, it's been great to work with the city council and the board, and Michelle's been on both sides of it, to be able to get this to work for both parties. And I think ultimately it will work out really well for the neighborhood. The things we're trying to do, maintaining the park and not pushing that softball field further south.
Yes.
Is the public aware of the yellow book requirement? I mean, I'm just a little worried about the perception that the city is trying to squeeze every dollar out of this school district that it can, and that's obviously not what's going on here. It has to do with this, right? It's a restriction that's placed upon the sale.
It is, as part of that land and water conservation, the yellow book is there as a stipulation. And I know when we had the public meeting at Edgemont, that did come up. And so we've been able to talk about that. And I think the school district understands the requirement to land and water conservation fund land. So I think both sides know that it's not a cash grab. It's a requirement towards the mitigation of this property.
Superintendent's not here.
No, he's not here. Okay, I was gonna see if anyone else from this.
Anything you want to add representing the school district?
No, I think the only thing that we would be concerned with as we look at this layout is long-term, this is definitely what, we would propose. If and when, and it's probably more of a when, Timp-Kiwanis High School needs to be rebuilt, there may be a temporary time frame in which we may need some of that green space for staging and construction, but it would be temporary. And I don't want anybody to go into that thinking we're trying to mislead anybody if that happens in 15 years down the road or 10 years down the road, whatever that time frame may be. It's a very tight site and we're trying to rebuild around the existing school. We would need some room for staging and construction equipment and whatnot. So there could be a short time frame and there were some things have to shift from this plan, but it would be just in the interim.
That reminds me of a concern that was brought up at the neighborhood meeting. It's been quite a while ago, but concern was expressed if the high school is rebuilt. Is there any assurance that it would be reconfigured, like with buildings ending up on the south side, or what kind of assurances, I guess, are there with that?
I think the MOU will probably cover that. Because unless we get together with city council to say, yes, we want to change the whole entire plan, I think the MOU is going to hold the school board to keeping that to the north. We have had some very preliminary discussions on, what we would look like when we do get ready to build. Everything we've talked about has been phased around the existing building. And a lot of it has to do with the existing sewers there, the existing utilities are there, and why recreate and shift everything south. So I think the purpose of the MOU is to try to reassure everybody that that's the intent, is to keep that green space.
See, Mr. Parker.
Well, I was just going to mention we've been in the process of trying to put the final. We're working on the final agreement, but we've kind of come up with a term sheet essentially that we've shared with the district. And our concept would be that if there was any change of use that modified this site plan, that it would require a majority vote of the school board to make a request, essentially pass a resolution declaring their intent. And that the city council would then have to approve a resolution authorizing the change in the interlocal agreement or MOU. And both of those actions would have to take place in a publicly noticed meeting at which public comment is allowed. So the idea was to create two different avenues to ensure that any concerns by the neighborhood or anyone else in the city that would want to express a concern would be heard before a final decision would be made. So our intent is to outline that process in the agreement.
I think one of the things that, as I listen to the neighborhood, one of the concerns that they've had is that they would like to see the stipulations as far as defining what open means to open to the community meetings. And,
right.
And if we have those things written out, I know that those are big concerns in the neighborhood.
Yeah. So for example, one of the terms the neighborhood requested was that each month, the beginning of the month, the school district would put out a public notice about what's been scheduled on the various facilities at this location. And that if nothing was scheduled, then the facility would be open for community use. And so they would essentially define that at the beginning of each month, put it up on their website so that the neighborhood and others could see what was programmed on any of the fields. And then the soccer field and tennis courts and so on would be available for use by the public at times they weren't scheduled by the district. So I think we've tried to address that question about kind of what it means. We've also agreed, at least included in the term sheet, is there'd be no rentals. So there's not school district would not rent the soccer field for private teams or some other purpose. So it would not be scheduled for anything other than authorized student athletic programs.
So you're doing the same thing with the gate.
That's correct. Yeah.
If we have to deal with this.
Yes.
So as a Provo City Park currently, could that area be reserved currently? Could it be rented right now?
Sure, it would require, since we have a pavilion, the pavilion can be rented, and there would be a special park use where it could be rented at this point, yes.
So it's actually removing that use, that ability to rent is actually being removed through that regulation.
It is.
Although they still will be able to rent, will they be able to rent that pavilion, the new pavilion?
It won't be ours.
Yeah, they
So
do.
we are still the school.
That's certainly something that we I think the main thing was we were trying to avoid having junior soccer on that soccer field all of the time, and then the neighborhood can't use the soccer field because we were renting it to the junior soccer fields. So I think that was kind of the reason for not renting it, but we could certainly take over, scheduling rentals of that pavilion for the neighborhood.
So even Parks and Recreation is affected. We're, the largest soccer runner in Provo, so even we have committed that this is not going to be one of our program sites.
Any other questions? So at this point,
We just mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I sent an email to Marion this morning and indicated that we would, if the council wanted to move forward, our intent would be to send out a letter, email, some communication to all the interested parties, including the neighborhood, that outlined the terms and a copy of the site plan and gave them kind of early notice of the public hearing that would be scheduled for us to make the determination about surplusing. So again, we're going to make an attempt to get good, accurate information out early in the game. We didn't want to do that before having this meeting, so we didn't anticipate an answer that you might or might not give. So I wanted to make sure we got through this meeting first, but it is our intent to get something out in the next day or two to the neighborhood once an official public hearing date is set, if that's the direction you decide to go.
So do you need a motion for that?
Well, I think we'd like an expression, a desire to set it at the first available council meeting based on noticing requirements, and then we just work through that detail with your staff and our staff and try to get us ready to go. And then it would be, again, we would bring to you the real estate purchase contract, the interlocal agreement between the city and the school district. And then part of that agreement would be conditioning the closing on getting final land and water conservation approval, having a site where we could move the money to, and again, we put some caveats into there about the time at which we'd close, but the intent would be for you to hold a public hearing and then make the decision whether to surplus it.
I just go back to this question of rental for a second. I mean, having coached a number of soccer teams in my past life, I can totally see somebody saying, "Oh, there's a soccer field there. I'm going to have regular practices there on Tuesday afternoons." I mean, they can check that schedule and see that it's available. But then what happens when the other team is also wanting that same? Is there a reservation, even if it's not a rental? Can they say
I think the sense we had from the neighborhood was they want,
serve always.
Right, yeah. Basically, yeah. I don't think they wanted to exclude a neighborhood soccer team from being able to practice there, but by the same token, they didn't want it booked up all the time, so they couldn't use it for just neighborhood events or things that they might choose to do in their neighborhood park.
But if somebody says, well, we want to have a family event or a wedding reception or something like that, that's not a good option because they can't be guaranteed that no one else.
Right. The only thing, again, if the school district might make a determination as to whether to rent the pavilion, that could be a possibility, but they wouldn't rent the soccer field. So again, that would be on the first come, first served basis.
That actually may become a little bit of a challenge for us because we already experience our fields being heavily used by leagues without us knowing it's even happening and without them renting it.
That's
So
why.
that could very well happen, and unless one of our facilities people or principal or somebody happens to be at the school, there could be a league using that field all the time without our knowledge. And so that hopefully we would find out somehow we could circumvent that, but that is a problem. for
Well,
us
and
on
what
all
they
of the
typically
rules.
do is they'll say, oh, we've got this reserved.
Right.
Right, yeah.
We've got, or they just say, we've got this
But
every
in
Tuesday
this
at
event,
4.
right now, we can say, no, you don't, you haven't rented it from us, we don't have a rental agreement with you. In this event, if it's first come, first served, we won't have a lot of recourse to say, you gotta get off.
Right.
So that.
Could be
that may
signed.
something we're gonna have to work through.
Could be signed that says no reservations available here, first come, first served only, and just make it clear that there's not a reservation option.
This is definitely backed up by a pretty extensive field rental program that Parks and Recreation does, which allows you to control your destiny with your team. Obviously, we are under a field shortage, and so it can be pretty competitive and tough, but we do have a formal program to provide those practices.
So at this point, are you just looking for?
Just a motion, if you're prepared to move it forward to the next available council meeting for a public hearing.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this? So this, and at that point, that's when we are gonna have a public meeting, just for the public. We will let them know that the neighborhoods will be involved in the meeting before it comes to council. Is that what
No, our intent now is to just come, invite the neighborhood to come to the public hearing.
to come to the public hearing?
Yeah.
Okay,
But it's
Yeah,
been, I
we'll-
feel
we'll-
really good about it. I mean, we've held multiple meetings and
We'll mail out the information so they have plenty of time to look at it, and organize if they choose to, and be prepared for the public hearing.
okay. So we have a motion and a second. Those in favor? That passes unanimously.
I just want to say thank you to the council because we've been working on this for a couple of years and we're so anxious to get it going. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the partnership on this one.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, item number 6, a discussion on a request for an ordinance to amend Provo City Code Sections relating to residential design standards. And Aaron, we thank you for starting this one.
Thank you. So we'll get the wording up there in a second. The planning staff has brought forward this request to amend a few sections having to do with residential design standards. The first few that you'll see on the screen are just kind of cleanups, referencing old references that reference the wrong section and things like that. The bulk of it is there in section 287. Just moving forward with most of this has to do with medium, higher density residential projects like townhomes, apartments. Moving forward, we wanted to kind of set a clear expectation with developers, with property owners, with neighborhoods of the requirements of what the building should look like. So we've kind of gotten rid of the old design standards there and brought in a whole new set. So it hasn't substantially changed what is allowed. A lot of the changes that you'll see is in the prohibited materials. EFS is one example of something that's not going to be able to be a major material on an apartment or a townhome anymore. Vinyl, the past few years we've been seeing a lot of vinyl come in on these projects. And this staff just wants to make sure that we have durable, aesthetically pleasing materials on our residential projects that come into the city. Planning Commission recommended approval unanimously on this, and so now it's in front of you.
Thank you very much. Dave?
You mentioned that this is directed at the larger projects. Is
Yeah,
there
so there's-
anything anywhere that limits it to the large ones, or this is the only place where you see these problems?
It's just the zones that reference this section. So your low density residential, medium density residential, campus mixed use, high density residential, they all reference this section for new projects.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? This is already on the agenda for tonight for the first public hearing, and according to our rules, we can pass this tonight unless there is a council member that would like to take it to the next
discussion.
So on prohibited materials, vinyl and aluminum siding.
As prohibited major materials. So a major material is defined as 80% of the building. So you can't use vinyl as a major material. It can be used as a detail, as minor material, but it can't be the majority of the building.
Have you had any pushback on stucco from developers?
Not from developers. I know that there's a couple of comments made at Planning Commission that the EVIS just doesn't last around here with the climate, with the freezing, and it's not a real durable item for Provo, Utah.
So how does hardy board fit in that category?
Hardy board is permitted. I believe it's, let's see. Let me find it. You see it, fiber cement board, there it is. So it's allowed as a minor material. So 20% or less in the building. Again, it can't be the major material. So major materials are just those four that you see there.
And so, yeah, I was just wondering why. I mean, that's really durable stuff.
Right, there's durability, but there's also, the aesthetics of the building that need to be looked at.
I mean, it looks like wood siding, but
I just don't know how you distinguish between you allow wood for wood siding and you don't allow, and I'm not trying to push either one, I know it's real hard to distinguish that. Hardy board and wood siding.
That's definitely something that we could look at if there's a opinion that should change.
And the only reason I didn't bring it up is just to avoid, we address it right now or wait until somebody challenges and address it then.
David, the expert, would you like to see it changed?
There's also this section D here, other materials with approval, materials that are not listed. So that section there gives us some discretion, some leeway. But again, if you want to see that changed.
It's just, if you look at the history, well, on the history, the fiber cement board started happening first, and then people kind of didn't like using it because of the costs and so then the wood guys said, hey, how can we make a product that looks like fiberboard, but it has, it's easier to use and stuff, and that's when LP and everybody came up with, wood siding that it's comparable. So it was a fiber cement board that they were copying, and now we're allowing that and not allowing the other. So I just see it maybe an argument there somewhere, and I don't know.
I think the fiber cement is more, requires more maintenance. It looks very good, it's durable, but after about 10 years, it definitely needs to be repainted. And on a large project, that can be a major expense. That's a large part of the material. But again, that's for your expertise.
And again, if we can win that argument, I'm for that. I prefer the wood over the fiber. I don't like using the fiber cement wood, but I just know it.
Wood's gotta be painted too, though.
Yeah.
Doesn't peel and become unsightly like fiber cement does.
This is a good discussion on hardy board. Have we run this past like Habitat for Humanity that does a lot of building and uses certain materials, and will this affect what they do?
Nobody came out to the Planning Commission public hearing. I'm not sure if they'll come out tonight.
It would only affect them if there's an LDR zone.
Yeah, it's based on the zone.
Yeah.
So it's an LDR, HDR, campus heating density. So these are going to be multifamily projects predominantly. In fact, I can't even imagine a single family
No, this wouldn't apply to
residence wanting to build in the LDR.
My feeling is leave it how it is, and hopefully when the argument happens, and I think it lasts.
One possibility would be tonight, we'll hear it the first time, continue it for 2 weeks, and then we reach out to anyone, developers, anyone who feel like that may
keep building these type of things and let them know that they have 2 weeks to give us feedback.
Does anyone, I think when we go in tonight, it would be nice to know if we wanted to continue this for a second public hearing, or if we want to pass it tonight.
I'd support voting on tonight.
Probably would support it. I mean, Bill, these things, considering your comment on the Hardy Board, have been thought through, right?
Yes, but it's fine if you like this long enough for us to target some of the groups you have in mind and ask them about it. We'd be happy to do that. There's nothing pending. I don't believe that this is a delay we get in the way of, so whatever you think.
Well, out of respect, maybe we ought to ask.
And you're willing to reach out to 1 or 2 people?
Sure.
Okay, according to council rule, if one council member would like to have a second public opinion,
We generally ask that.
and thank you, I appreciate that. Just be aware that that will be asked tonight then, and if someone would like to be willing to do that, feel free. If we don't get that motion to carry it forward for one more public hearing, we will call for a motion to see whether it will be approved tonight or not.
Sort of like big development, so
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Aaron, Josh, we'll move to item number 7.
Thank you. Recent development proposals in the East Center Street area, which we're defining as the area from 200 East to the roundabout at 7 Peaks Boulevard and Center Street at the east end of the west end of the State Hospital campus. There has been recent development proposals there that could cause concern among the surrounding neighborhoods that the existing development regulations under the different zones that are in place along this corridor or could be applied are insufficient to protect the unique character of the corridor, and that the unique character of East Center Street particularly requires additional design regulations to protect its unique and somewhat diverse character as zone map amendments and new construction or redevelopment occurs. This proposed design corridor regulates the following elements: architectural style, building orientation, which includes width, height, mass of buildings, their setbacks, the location of parkings, specific provisions related to the configuration of courtyard buildings, and then the materials and construction quality, the types and locations of signs and lighting, and some aspirational statements regarding the future design and evolution of Center Street. I received this ordinance, or community development received this after an extensive collaborative drafting process was conducted by the neighborhood, led by Norm Thurston and involving representatives from Foothills, Mazer, Joaquin, and Provost. They brought to us a document essentially encapsulating their desires, and then we worked on it extensively to bring it into a form that clearly and concisely conveyed their desires and provided the restrictions and regulations in a way that they felt comfortable met their interest and protected the character of the neighborhood as they felt that it needed to be protected.
Just a quick question. So you list materials. Do the materials required or restricted coincide or conflict with what we were just talking about?
Those lists were developed independently, and there are some materials on our list which are permitted as major materials that are not conversely in the other list. So where the additional restrictions in an LDR or an MDR that could be put in place perhaps on the east end of this corridor, down in this area, the most restrictive would apply. The neighborhood essentially looked at this corridor and took inventory of the palette of materials that are present in those buildings that reflect its historic character and period, and based their list off of that. I can go through that quickly if you'd like.
I guess one reason I was curious is the actual impetus for them doing this was that southeast quadrant with the high density.
Yes.
On the other hand, it's a little embarrassing that we have a unique asset like East Center Street, and we've never tried to protect it before with the design corridor. If you look at other design corridors around the city, East Center Street would seem to cry out as one needing that.
And it was listed in the general plan under table 5.2 as a proposed design corridor, and is one of those that for some reason has never been formally addressed and had a design corridor adopted for it.
The only point I was trying to make is their consternation was with one project and the impact it was going to have. And so as they thought about the form and the mass and the materials and all that, they ended up with a different list of materials. So I'm just hoping that we reconcile any differences.
Well, I would also say that, well, that project was an impetus for and a motivation for this process. The process ended up taking a much more holistic view. And so the compatibility of projects or redevelopments or constructions or new additions up and down that essentially 8-block corridor represents more than just the potential impact of that one site. So that could be where some of those differences arise from.
So they didn't bifurcate it and say there's a standard for one, and
they did not.
Yeah.
Okay. Or it says skylights, solar panels, and other rooftop devices shall be minimized and located on 9th Street. What was the discussion on that? Just visually, they didn't want to see solar panels?
Yeah, they wanted to minimize the visual intrusion of that into the historic character of the neighborhood, and actually consulting with people that are familiar with current provision of solar, rooftop solar, especially in the city. There's as far as the net metering program goes, there's a greater need now for west-facing panels than there are for midday panels, and this provides a lot of opportunity both on the south side for south and west facing, and on the north side for west facing panels. So.
If you go to the previous slide with the map on it, I was trying to follow exactly what in the text, what was included and what wasn't, and I wasn't clear on something, and I see it in that southeast.
Yes.
Which you've got some properties that aren't actually fronting Center Street. So help me understand why those are in.
Okay, so a lot of times when we write zones, we take the worst possible outcome perspective and say, how could somebody potentially circumvent what we're trying to do here? And so we wrote the regulation to say every property with frontage along Center Street or any bordering property under common ownership, so that a developer couldn't parcel off a minimum depth parcel at the frontage and then create essentially a protection strip from the zone or from the design corridor, and then come to the rear of their property and construct a large project that was not controlled by the design corridor.
It would still be visible from the street.
Correct. So any frontage properties and adjoining properties under common ownership.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion. We'll have that discussion again for the first scheduled hearing tonight. And then we will, if anyone would like to have a second hearing, would you please be aware that that motion will need to be made tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, we are 40 minutes behind, and
You're doing good.
we're schedule a 10-minute break. Let's take 5. Come back here and go on to the next item. Please take 5 minutes and we'll move on to the next item.
year ago, Orem City, Provo City, Mountain Lands, UTA got together and worked on an economic study along the BRT route. Benj Becker's here from Zion's Public Finance to just give you kind of the results of that year-long study and effort. I think he's been to you before. It has given you kind of periodic updates, but we're now to pretty much the finished product. And he's here to kind of go over to you the recommendations or findings of the study.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If you remember, Zion's presented to you in January. It was a kickoff, essentially, of what the project was going to entail. Since that time, we have met monthly for well over, actually, the last year with steering committees that are comprised of our partners here, which is Provo, Orem, UDOT, Mountain, or MAG, and UTA. So we've met on a monthly basis with several of your planners. We've had executive committee meetings that have happened 4 times. Mr. Parker's been involved in those. So we hope that you have felt like you've had a loud voice in this study. The study was to take a look at the potential economic impacts of the BRT, as well as potential transit-oriented development that could be spurred because of BRT. What I'm showing to you today is just a brief form of the final report that the City of Provo will be getting. This highlights a few recommendations, and I will go through those. Just to tell you quickly about the quick process, we went over all the existing conditions along the corridor, the study area. We created a housing report, which you will have, that shows all of the housing supply that you have within a half-mile of the BRT corridor. It includes low-income housing, the density of housing. It shows how close residents are to basic services such as grocery stores, hospitals, educational facilities. It's a very important report in allowing you and developers to make decisions on what use types are necessary in certain areas and how you can provide affordable housing that services the needs of that user type and allows them to have access to services. We looked at market conditions, all available inventory of your different property types within this area. There's a lot of surveying of buildings and looking at the retail vacancy, office vacancy. We looked at the impact of BRT on property values. Does it influence development? If so, where and how? And we did a really in-depth look at competitive markets, a lot of ownership developer surveys, and then this was focused around what were called highest and best use analyses, that term you heard earlier today. We looked at key nodes that we felt like had the greatest potential impact to benefit from BRT. We looked at the barriers to development that exist in those nodes, and those may be things like pedestrian access, bicycle access, current zoning, older uses in the area. We looked at, as I said, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and as part of this, your city is receiving a update to your bicycle and pedestrian plan. That was done by one of our partners, this Alta Planning and Design. They also are doing additional work that's been spurred from this study to do some design work on a few of the areas on the BRT line. So, for example, here's an example, I know that's hard to read, of a synopsis of the bicycle and pedestrian plan. This will show you where there are potential problems, where sidewalks maybe are limited, where crosswalks are not existing, and ultimately that plan comes up with recommendations of where are the highest priority pedestrian and bicycle improvements. And then ultimately, part of the study shows potential cost estimates there of what it would take in order to improve that area. The goal in improving these areas was to allow greater connectivity to BRT and to the surrounding areas. So areas where we thought there'd be the greatest impact of connecting residents, businesses, offices to BRT. When we looked at competitive markets, we wanted to see, does BRT have any influence in all of these markets, or is it just simply another bus route? And so it's a remarkable amount of data to look at these competitive markets. And our conclusions, in a brief nutshell here, show that within 200 yards of BRT station, yes, there is an impact. Once you get beyond that, the impact is severely limited. So we saw achievable rental rates being higher for the different property types, retail, and you can see there we're a little bit more specific there on retail, office, residential. Vacancy rates showed in competitive markets nominal decreases that were close to BRT stations and stops. Now, obviously, there are a lot of factors, whether BRT is dedicated lanes or if it has the prioritization signalization. And we took all of those impacts into consideration or characteristics into consideration.
Excuse me, is a station a stop?
Yeah, station stop. It goes back and forth here, which is
Okay. Make sure.
an editorial point that I need to change in here, but you caught it already. So yes, station and stop. Typically, we look at Provo Station and Orem Station as stations because they have front runner as well. And we looked at the others as stops, but we label everything here as that they're similar. Achievable rental rates, again, offices where there were direct intersections with BRT stops or stations, there were rental rate increases up to 3% near stations. Now, that's not significant. Obviously, from a developer's perspective, it's not monumental, it's not transformative, but it does have the ability to make an impact. And overall, the overall conclusion is that no, BRT will not be transformative from a development perspective for Provo, but it has the potential in select areas to be impactful and to drive decisions on density, building heights, and use types. Retail rents were influenced with specific use types. Retailers, like higher end retailers, do not necessarily benefit from the proximity to BRT. But those like convenience marts, a Walgreens type, a 7-Eleven, who typically more fit their buyer profile is more aligned with the user type of BRT. Those do see an impact from being close to BRT stops or stations. We saw residential increases for rental rate increases near stations. It was very specific to destination locations. So if you were at a stop, yes.
So when you talk about these increases, I could see brand new construction along the route for all of these various purposes and the new construction being higher rent. Did this also translate into existing older units upping the rent?
Yes, it did. Yep. Absolutely, especially with the residential, the fact that you had now access to a much better transit situation, we saw increases on all the property types. So not necessarily just, and we actually show you that in the change that we think you'll have in fiscal impacts from what's existing now to what we believe will be existing because of the benefits of BRT. It's not overly substantial, but it's monumental or notable enough to obviously consider. We looked at the differences in density allowances, and this is all contained within the report where we saw increases for potential density for the different use types and parking characteristics. We looked at specifically all these factors and nodes along the line where we thought would have the greatest potential impact to be transformative and the greater likelihood. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of that box, the larger green circles suggest here that they have, I think there's a laser on this. Hopefully I don't, there we go. The green shows this ability to overcome barriers, and the larger the circle is the impact of opportunity. So really, the sites that have a lot of development potential and will key in off of BRT are shown here in Provo as Provo Station, 400 South University Avenue, Orem Station having impact, 2230 North University Parkway, that's your mix. These properties down here, 7 and 8, 2 and 11, these are the 900 East around by the LDS Temple, the Missionary Training Center. Some of those areas where we felt like the potential for development was quite unlikely and very minimal in terms of the BRT having impact on that area. As you know, there are not dedicated lanes in that area. The existing character of the neighborhood suggests that that was an area that ultimately we learned this quickly and did not spend a lot of focus on that. I would imagine that that right there makes quite a few of your citizens happy. For example, 400 South University Avenue, we looked at all of the barriers that exist here for redevelopment or for long-term new development. And some of these barriers that ultimately the city council and your ordinances and your work can help so that you capitalize on the benefit that BRT can provide. Example here, if you know this, obviously know this area. We looked at, for just one example that we're showing here, is this site that currently is occupied by a motel. And we think it's a very transformative area. It's close to Provo Station. It's obviously very close to the temple, to the PEG development, and to this flow of kind of energy and activity that's happening as you come south off of Center Street. We looked at what the existing uses are now and their current valuations and what that ultimately does in terms of your fiscal impacts. So currently the city, directly to the city is receiving about $2,700 from that site. And where we think the highest and best use, and we think this is possible partially because of BRT. Now, that motel as it exists right now is not the highest and best use. So regardless of BRT, there is a highest and best use that is different than the existing motel. But we think because of BRT, and the study had shown that you would get the higher rents, or you could get some higher densities, and ultimately it creates a little bit of impact. Now, this is not enough that I assume that is overly exciting to a city council, but when this is put through all the different stops that happen in Provo, this becomes a little bit more enticing. And real quick, this just includes property tax valuations and potential point of sale. Does not include any energy, municipal taxes. Yes.
I was just curious, you have FAR, FAR, and HBU, just what are those?
Yes, and UTA asked me to spell those out, and obviously I didn't right there. That means the floor area ratio.
Okay.
And then HBU would be highest and best use. Sorry. That's a good point, though, so that if the public sees this, we should certainly spell that out. So we come up in this study with recommendations of what we think would be the property types and the building types that could be supported here on 400 South University on this specific site, and how we think that that would spur additional development. As you'll see, there's no hardy board. Sorry, I heard the previous. Sorry, bad joke. I was here. We make specific recommendations of how we think that this area, with the stop that is going to be right in this area, how this could be planned continuously with Provo Station, what type of uses between 5-story residential with a little bit of mixed-use designs, where we think that now podium parking is financially feasible, despite what a lot of developers may be telling you. They are doing it in many markets, and it is financially feasible. They just don't love the returns. The report also, we take a look at Provo Station. I'll click through this. I know we're a little bit short on time. But we look at, obviously, what we think is a very crucial area for Provo. Has the potential for significant redevelopment and retainment of the existing character that we see in parts of that area. We drew some sketch plans of what we think could, possibly happen in that area. We presented this to a neighborhood group in that area. This is the proposed and the bridge that is, I believe Bill has his funding in place, correct?
I think we're still
partially.
working on
This is the, I guess this is the location that UTA has submitted. So anyways, we took, and this is right now, we're looking kind of northeast here, as you would recognize this 100 West heading north here. And this is right now a single-story building, a lot of excess parking, and the potential there to have some of these areas be redeveloped to have better, highest and best uses and more uses that are creating maybe a greater return for the neighborhood. Here's another look, and this is, again, all within the report. And we went through these designs, showed them to the neighborhood and these neighborhood chairs, and took their suggestions and feedbacks in terms of designs or where they thought properties would be too tall and greater setbacks, just to give an idea of what could be possible in the neighborhood. This is in no way a suggestion of what should be done there, but from a highest and best use perspective, the development community would support this type of density and this type of building height. again, here, this is the same look, the current use. This is a variety of uses there at Provo Station, and then what we believe were highest and best uses because they're impacted by the proximity to BRT. Ultimately, we make recommendations on what we think would be appropriate there at Provo Station. Different residential use types, what type of parking, the amount of parking. And those are really, for Provo, what we see are the two key areas of Provo Station and 400 South. We also believe the mix to have significant potential and will benefit from BRT. Ultimately, that's the end of the abbreviated highlights. But just to reiterate that not transformative from, it will drive dollars, and from a development perspective. We think from a socio-economic perspective, sure, it has potential benefits that will be great to citizens of your community. Obviously, as you've heard, it's now providing, BYU and UV will be providing passes. It'll be a major asset for students being able to connect to different areas. We think employers will use this as a way to connect to students. Yes. No, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, you're doing good. So in your experience in other communities, when affordable housing is built close to the mass transit, what is the nature of it? Is it 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom? What's the size, the footprint?
Yeah, so it varies significantly from if it's light rail, they're dedicated rails, or BRT. And BRT, we did not find as much in terms of constant trends on the use type. It specifically, I mean, it was impacted by, were you connecting to universities? Were you connecting a hospital and employment centers? In other areas where we found that it was really university driven, then yes, we were seeing 2 bedroom, but high occupancy 2 bedrooms. So it was, a lot of users, a lot of students. In light rail type developments, we were seeing much more 1 bedroom use. So you would get the professional workers who wanted to go 3 or 4 blocks to their employment.
How big is the unit, square footage?
I would say like a 1 bedroom, and I'd have to, it'd probably be a stab, but fairly small in the 700 square foot range. 2 bedrooms, maybe more in the 1100, 1050, 1100, 1200, something like that. We talked to a significant number of property owners along the line to get their feedback on if they felt like it'd be something that would spur development, how they felt that maybe their tenants would use it, or the potential residents would use the line. So a lot of that is contained within the reports and helped us in our findings and determinations. Yes.
Just a quick snapshot then of any feedback on 9th East, basically from 900 North to the University Parkway. I mean, maybe you were aware that area, the neighborhood was
sensitive,
very concerned about commercialization of the area, some sort of infiltration into the family neighborhood there east of 9th East. Did you, I mean, what I saw very briefly there was it looked like a couple of those areas were in the lower left, a couple of them were closer to the middle. Any observations or feedback on that particular area?
Yes, some, in all truthfulness, from the beginning of the study, we were certainly told that area would have some sensitivity and to proceed with some white gloves, or whatever the right word is to say that. And so we looked at that area as having the barriers that were significant there were that you don't have the dedicated lanes. And in markets where you don't have the dedicated lanes, the BRT has very limited impact. So initially that was enough suggestion to us that without the dedicated lane, you really weren't going to see much in terms of long-term development. Then as BYU is a major property owner there, and just the, maybe the red tape there, not red tape, but the blue tape, whatever, of trying to deal with BYU and property acquisition and conforming with BYU's plans, made some of those stops, I mean, particularly across from, Edwards Stadium, as being a little bit trickier and not suggesting that they had potential for near-term development. So yes, most of that area we saw as very limited potential. Any other questions? So ultimately, we'll have a report. The bill's seen 99% of it. It gives you a housing study, bike and pedestrian plan, and then it gives all of this data and the key recommendations. We do think that it's a great benefit for your city. Many businesses have talked about how are they going to connect to Provo Station or get their employees to Provo Station and then connect, be able to get their employees back and forth from there. So it does have the option of greater options for students in order to connect with employment and residences. And I think that's it. Yeah.
I had one more question.
Yeah.
Did you have any conversation with the Bicycle Committee of Provo? Because I know they've been designing some bike plans for the city for a while.
Yes.
So maybe you want to speak to that, the
Yes,
additional work.
Caleb was involved.
Okay, great.
And I think part of the additional work that is happening with this is we realize.
Recommendation from there.
I think as we go forward with this impact on URT and the construction is really starting to hit us very, very strongly. And I think it'd be really good if we, as a council, be able to look at some of these things so that when the residents can come up to us and say, what the heck are you doing to us? Say, this is what these are some of the benefits and some of the things that we are recognizing around it.
You will probably know further charges. What is that impact right now? It seems like to be substantial.
It is impacting more and more, and there's a few things that I'm dealing with that my concerns don't have to do with the impact of what it's going to be. It's more or less of how it's being done right now, and that's been the frustration of my tenants, mostly how it's being done, rather than what is it going to
It's going
do.
on for a while.
Yeah, it has gone on for quite a while, and that's been frustration with most of my tenants on University Avenue. And so I just think it's important for us to have this be aware of this. These are the things that we can answer to and understand as we get the questions on what's going on.
Yeah, a great economic study would be the impact of the dollars lost because of construction compared to the dollars potentially gained because of, but that's not part of the study. But anyways, I'm sure that's what your tenants are dealing with, is feeling like we're losing potential dollar because of this construction. Hopefully we will regain this down the road.
And those are some of the answers that are coming out. Yep. So as long as we're aware of that, because this is impacting the whole city and our downtown especially. So just be aware of that. Thank you for the update.
Yep, thank you.
Any other questions before we? Okay. For item number 9, the discussion of proposed Utah City Code Ordinance amendment related to signage. Dave Sewell, you want to start this one, David? Looks like your name's up here to start with, and Gary McGinn. Hi.
Okay, can I just do a real brief introduction? Are you prepared, Mr. McGinn, to take it from there?
Sure.
Okay, well, from my perspective, what got me interested in this was two things. And although this ordinance does a couple of additional things, I think, but one was I was concerned about the city's legal position, wanted to strengthen it in certain areas, and I think considering all the attorneys in the room, I probably won't say any more about that. I'll leave that to others to address, but that is was a significant part of the motivation I felt. The other thing was we had a request from Supersonic on 17 something Union Boulevard, wanted to replace their electronic sign, which was starting to fail. And they're currently in an area where electronic signs are not allowed and they're grandfathered in. As we got to looking at it, right now electronic signs are allowed on Freedom Boulevard from 500 North to 940 North. And the corridor from 940 to University Parkway seemed very similar to the commercial corridor, so we thought it made sense to extend the area where they're allowed. So that was kind of the initial motivation. I think that there's another benefit from the enforcement side that Mr. McGinn could articulate better if we would make part of the code into the business license section. So if you want to take it from here, is there anything significantly left out?
Well, as I understand it, the ordinance does a couple of things. One, it does take some of our, well, we do in our city allow electronic signs in some locations. And as a land use, people have non-conforming rights or they're grandfathered in. So if someone has an older sign, it doesn't have to comply with our new lighting standards. And so I think one of the desires or one of the ideas was, well, we could move some of those requirements into the licensing section. Now as a part of licensing, they would have to comply with those signs and people wouldn't be grandfathered. That's one issue. The other issue is that this sign would allow signs to be electronic. It doesn't change the number of signs that are allowed in town. It doesn't change the location of signs. All of those rules already exist and they're still the same. It just would allow, if you have a sign, it can now be an electronic sign. And then the ordinance has high churn areas where the copy of the sign, we already had language in the ordinance that dealt with that. And it can turn over every 8 seconds. And then you have low churn areas. So if you have now an electronic sign, you can change the copy on that sign. I think it's 3 times a day. I'm going from memory there. Now, I think at the last meeting, the council continued it because they had some questions. And so I am here to answer your questions.
So specifically, I'm somewhat concerned with the design corridor on Center Street between the freeway and Fifth West. That's currently a spot that allows electronic signs, so it will allow high churn signs. I think there's only one small electronic crawler there currently now. And so I kind of almost want to see if we could just take that off and make it a low churn, take off that special designation so only low churn electronic signs would be there. And I specifically asked if I can't remember who I asked, who was presenting 2 weeks ago, but I asked, if we could be brought some images, some visuals, so we can kind of wrap our heads around what would that look like if we had high churn signs there. It kind of stuck in my head because you've used it as a good visual, is the corner of Bulldog and State. And so I'm kind of visualizing, a full-size billboard being on Center Street, changing every 8 seconds. And that's not what I think would be good for the design corridor. But then I also realized that that's probably not allowed. So I was hoping for some visuals in order to.
Well, the only visual I could think that you could put in there is just go to Google Street View. Okay. And whatever sign they have, that could now be electronic.
Is every commercial property there built as large and signs as they possibly can? Because
I don't know. I would doubt it. I would imagine. Now, if the council's interested in, we could come and show you what all of the zones signage allows, and it's different in all the zones. Some of them are grouped together, but there are differences. Now, the one that you see on Bulldog and State Street, Fifth West, the ordinance doesn't change all the location, size requirements, anything like that. It's just, if you have a sign, it's now electronic. And so, the couple of big policy questions for the council, and the biggest ones is, do you want electronic signs in your community? And to what extent do you want them? I've yet to meet a business that doesn't think they desperately need one.
I guess the question, people might have a smaller sign, if you allow a larger one, if it can be electronic, they'll build a larger one. Is that the case under the ordinance?
No, it's whatever. We already have all these rules over that deal with size in location that they can have signs. This ordinance would just say, okay, all these rules that applied, rather than putting in just a backlit sign, it can now be electronic.
Don't you think though, the people that have the smaller sign because it's not as noticeable might go to a larger sign under the ordinance?
Oh yeah, that they would, if the ordinance allowed them to build a bigger sign, that would be my guess, yeah, that they would want to do that. So if it would be helpful for the council, you know, so I don't have any pictures, we'd have to do, say, like a SketchUp mock-up of a typical building in a zone, you know, show you how big a typical commercial building is in the zone. And then under the ordinance, what type of signage it can have, because it'll be able to have maybe a monument sign, some wall signs on the building. And then all of those they could do today now if they built that or they wanted to do it. But with the new ordinance, then they could make them electronic.
Yeah, my concern all along was not so much with the specifics of the ordinance, but just the overall question that you mentioned here of how many electric signs do you want in a city? At what, I mean, yeah, I want an electric sign if I see that the guy across the street has one and he gets all the attention. Then I get one, and then the guy down the street gets another, and then next thing you know, there's 17 of them. What you have is a major light pollution problem, and no one's getting the benefit of having an electric sign because there's so much distraction. And then they say, well, I'm going to put this, I'm going to show a little video of a car crashing, or someone, you know, like that when you come off of the highway and you get onto University Parkway, there's that big
Dexter.
Yeah, they're showing some video, and you're driving along, and you find your eye drawn to it.
And this ordinance prohibits that.
Yeah, okay.
Now, that would be, you know, if you allow electronic signs and people have the capability to show full motion video, I'm guaranteeing at some point they will.
Yeah.
And we'll have an enforcement issue.
I guess the question is this a discussion about a separate ordinance that we would need in order to take a survey of the city and say, we need to make sure that this doesn't proliferate beyond reason, that we don't have just a ridiculous number of electronic signs that then make certain areas of the city look like, I've said Las Vegas before, I'm picking on the poor city of Las Vegas, but I mean, is there some way to make sure that we have an aesthetic appearance of the city that is what we like, and that we don't create a problem where we end up with this constant escalation of the louder sign wins, and so then you just get bigger and louder and brighter and more distracting.
Now, there are two issues with electronic signs. One is the brightness issue, and one is the churn issue. And this ordinance would say, if you're in a high churn area, you can flip the copy every 8 seconds. And that's similar to what you see on the freeway. Every 8 seconds, it instantaneously flips from one image to the next. There's no transition or anything like that. In other areas of the city, I think the ordinance says they're low churn, and so they can do that 3 times a day. Now, is there a potential enforcement issue with that? Yes, somebody's doing it 4 times a day. And are we going to have people out staking that out, you know, sitting there to, and, you know,
I'm sure
it flips and then we put the
merit badge project.
It could be. And then the second issue, well, now having said that, what this ordinance would do would then say, okay, we do have some non-conforming signs that have lots of churn. And so I always give the example, if you go over by Macy's or Walgreens on Bulldog and Fifth West there, you have that flower store that has a non-conforming sign. They have a sign that's a little too bright under the current standards, and they churn and have pretty much live motion. And on Walgreens, there's a billboard that only does it every 8 seconds, and it keeps the dimness down. Under this proposal, the dimness and churning would be put into business licensing, and we could go to businesses and say, now as a part of your business license, you have to comply with this and you have to quit doing those full motions. The biggest exception, and the number one sign complaint we get in the city, we have no control over. It's the school district, and it's all their school signs. And people complain because it's like, you know, somebody who's just learning how to do PowerPoint and all the entrances and presentations and spins and flips, let's have them design our copy. And that's what it tends to be. And state law precludes us from doing anything about that. So no matter what we do here today and you decide, it has no impact on what the school districts are doing. And the number one source of complaint we get about signs. Now, the second issue, or probably the biggest issue, is this: we don't want it to be too bright. And the way the brightness works is if you do have more light in the area, your signs can be brighter. And so, yes, if you do bring in more signs, the ambient light in the area in general will be brighter. Therefore, when you go to have your sign and the level of brightness that you have at which it will be shining will raise. Does that make sense? You know, just the same if we put in more street lights or you know, just more ambient lighting in a parking lot or things like that. It'll raise the ambient lighting of the area and the brightness level will go up and the whole area will become brighter.
Gary,
Yes.
since there's all these questions, why do we want to do it?
I don't know. Why do you? This is the quintessential policy question for the council. And I think Councilmember Sewell articulated it takes care of one issue on a current lawsuit. I think the other thing is with technology that's coming. As a community, we've got to get our arms around what do we want to do, because more and more pressure is going to be hitting the city to deal with signs. And we haven't ever really had a big, robust discussion on signs, other than businesses and sign companies. When they want to put in the sign, the first thing they do is come in and say, can we put in an electronic sign? And in most areas of the city, the answer is no, you can't. And so there's a lot of pressure to do that. And all the rules don't have to be the same. You know, there's in a heavy retail area, maybe around the mall or in Riverwoods, the rules may be different than in other areas of the city. And so that's a really important question.
Can I ask an economic development director question? If we didn't pass the sign ordinance, would it affect your ability to attract businesses? Because if no one can have it, then.
Well, yeah, but you're not talking about no one can have it. You're just talking about, as I understand it, kind of a limited section and spectrum of the city. Is that correct, Gary?
Well, no, it would allow, it takes kind of that limited spectrum. Under the original ordinance, where we did deal with electronic signs, we did have a limited area in the city. And pretty much that limited area that already allows electronic signs, I believe, becomes the high churn area with some, with at least one addition on Freedom Boulevard, which frankly makes sense.
It goes from like 9th North to Parkway,
To
right?
Parkway or
Yeah,
something like
it's
that. It kind of ended at 9th.
About 7
And it
blocks.
extends that to Parkway. And then in other areas where people have signs, it says, okay, yeah, the technology's there. That's what sign companies are building. It allows you more flexibility. You don't have to hire a kid to get on a ladder and go up and change your copy. You can just do it. It's easier to make. Okay, so we're going to let you do that. And you're in a low churn area and you can only change it 3 times a day.
Okay.
If you pull up that third document there, I think I kind of rushed through the reasons a little fast. This kind of walks through the rationale for the proposal. So when we're talking about low churn, this is a new category of electronic sign that currently doesn't exist in the ordinance. I think of it as static because it's only
changing 3 times a day, you're hardly going to ever see a change. What we're currently calling high churn is the same as what's currently in the ordinance. Does that make sense? So the current ordinance allows electronic signs that can change up to every 8 seconds. They can't have fading, they can't have video, they can't have transitions. They just have to be static images that can be updated no more than every 8 seconds. And that's the same for the high churn in this proposal. So we, going down to the next bullet point, so we'd be allowing high churn electronic signs in the same areas where they're currently allowed, with one new corridor that has just been mentioned along Freedom Boulevard there from 940 North to University Parkway. So that's the only difference in that respect.
And with that one, looking back on when we came up with those areas and put them in, honestly, today I can't give you a good reason why we didn't include that. And it probably was an oversight not to include on Freedom up to the Parkway.
The next bullet point down there allows low churn electronic signs anywhere that static backlit signs are currently allowed. The example I like to use for that is Dave's Market up near where I live. They've got this nice sign with the logo on it, but quite frequently when I go to the gym in the morning, I'll see a guy out there with a ladder, changing the lettering on the bottom. And where I see and again, I'll defer to our attorneys on this, but where I see the weakness in our current ordinance is that we're regulating based on what's inside the sign rather than the effect of the sign. So the example I would give, and if you go down a little lower here, or raise that up. So I give an example down there where it talks about sign A and sign B. So let's call the sign that's a day's sign A. It's a static backlit sign. Say a grocery store opened across the street from them. And it had a very similar looking sign. It was the same brightness, same size, but internally it was electronic, so they could just flip a switch to change it a couple times a day. Currently, that sign would be illegal, whereas the day's sign is legal. But a bystander walking by looking at the two signs would probably be hard pressed to tell what the difference is. And I think that is, again, I'll defer to the attorneys on this, but I think that's putting us in a weaker position than I would like to see us in terms of defending our sign laws.
I agree. For some reason, the analogy to me is you can go back to, I don't know, London in the 1800s, and they'd have a gaslight lamp on every corner, and somebody comes up with, hey, I can put an electric light in there and do the same thing. And people are like, well, I don't know if I like electric lights. Maybe they're going to be too bright. Well, we can tone them down, and we don't have to have a lamplighter come by and relight the lamp every day. It's just keeping up with technology, and I don't think it's really changing the net result.
Very well put. I agree, Mr. Kennedy.
And I don't think that we're not creating more signs. We're not giving anyone any opportunity to have bigger signs. It's the same as what we've got.
I would imagine in the future you'll see things, real estate for sale signs that some people will put in a front yard when they go to sell something. Those are going to be electronic someday. They just will, electronics are.
Unless we say that they can't, right?
What?
Unless
as a city we say we can't.
I mean, my concern really doesn't have to do with the nitty gritty of this particular ordinance. It's the larger question of what is the city doing to put a cap on the brightness of the city and what can be argued to be a waste of energy. So then the question is, does this ordinance somehow restrict us or tie us up in a way that would make it harder for us to then look at that question in a more comprehensive way for the whole city and decide if we wanted to put some restrictions on electronic signage?
Yeah, clearly if you pass this ordinance, and 3 years from now decide, no, we don't want electronic signs, you're gonna have many more electronic signs out there.
So, I mean, I guess that's what's confusing me. I'm hearing on the one hand, it's not really going to affect the number of signs, but it will. I mean,
Well, my answer to that would be, again, getting back to external effects versus internal. I would say the concern that you're raising is about the external effect of light pollution. And I think that's a legitimate issue, but I think we should regulate that based on brightness standards, things like that, going back to Mr. McConnect's analogy, on the effect it would have rather than how it's built inside. Does that make sense? Because in theory, the sign at days, I mean, I don't know how bright you can make a backlit sign, but they could potentially juice that up and make that pretty bright too, within the limits of what we allow.
Well, we don't allow, I mean, we don't have any limit on that. So they could get some really big spotlights and shine on that sign right now today.
So I guess from that standpoint, the backlit signs are currently unregulated in terms of brightness?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So we would have a limit with the electronic signs.
But again, electronic signs, it takes the ambient light shed, in lack of a better term, and into consideration in determining how bright that sign can be. Whereas with non-electronic signs, there's no regulation on the brightness of them.
So I think I have a motion here. I appreciate this discussion. I understand it better. I missed the fact that really we already had pretty much everything's in place except now static backlit signs could be low churn electronic signs. That's why I feel better about that. 2 weeks ago, I did ask for some images, and I should have followed up. So my bad. But I would ask the council to consider maybe either continuing it for another couple of weeks so we can get those the imagery to at least help me understand how this would affect Center Street.
Can I ask a question when you're done on the imagery?
Okay, or just we're adding a part of Freedom Boulevard on here. Could we take Center Street between the freeway and 5th West out of the high churn area? I have no concerns about the low churn. I think the low churn is great. Changing out a backlit for a low churn, no problem. I am a little concerned about high churn, and I don't know if high churn really fits the design corridor for there. So either wait a couple weeks so I can get a little more comfortable about it, or if we want to move forward today, let's just take their Center Street off.
I can talk about, and Kay, help me out here because you and I were heavily involved in this, but if I remember right, it was the vision that we were hoping for on Center Street. That is one of the only entrances to our community where we foresaw potential commercial development on that off-ramp. And we wanted to make it economically viable, as economically viable as we could to support that.
Can you scroll that up so we can see something?
That vision of economic development on that particular corridor. Am I right?
No, you're right, you're right.
And so that was why that was put on to that particular
And I don't know, Dave, if you have a different vision for that part of than what was being contemplated at that.
Right. Well, one thing, nothing besides that one small crawler has gone in. So for whatever reason, people haven't chosen to put in high churn electronic signs.
And I support that, but that was the vision. That was why we actually went ahead and did that. And if there's no problems like that, I'm concerned about taking something off without having a major discussion around what the vision was in the first place.
Well, let me just clarify that. I say this, I guess, with some hesitation. It depends on what your policy issue is. Right? If you could take it off today, and you could always put it back in, right? I mean, if you took it off today, and somebody in the future wanted to build a sign there, all they have to do is come ask for a text amendment to get added to put that section back in, and you can do it. So that's the pro. The con is that they have to do that, and it's not just automatically approved. So
The other approach is instance, there was a vision like you talked about. That's one of our few entrances into the city, and how is it going to develop? If it becomes a problem, we can say, okay, that's enough, we've reached our saturation. So you monitor it. And right now, it's not an issue. If it doesn't mature into the positive commercial area that we envision, it's like, you'll know when you see it. And if you see a problem, if the future council sees a problem, then they deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying when you say, okay, I guess it would take, one sign too many or one sign, I'd say too big, except we're regulating how many and how big.
It's the churn that I'm concerned with. I would like to have a longer discussion on this if we wanted to move forward with it. And I appreciate what was the vision at the time and whatnot. I'm curious time-wise, we did a lot of visioning for this. We created the West Gateway, freeway commercial zones here. Was that before or after your discussion about where to allow electronic signs?
This was done after that. The sign issue was done after the vision of the gateways and things like that.
And the sign issue, one of the original things for it was, especially on Center Street, because we didn't allow electronic signs. A restaurant couldn't put an electronic menu board outside their building. And so you can come by and see what the menu is or things like that. And so that was one of the main reasons for the whole discussion about electronic signs originally in the areas that you came out. And again, the one on Freedom, I look at that in hindsight. I can't give you a good reason why we stopped at 9 in the area of 900 and didn't go to the Parkway. But as far as graphics that the council would help the council, can you help me understand what graphics those would be?
This is my first understanding, that's my own fault, but we're adding a high turn area.
We aren't adding
Just on Freedom Boulevard.
just Freedom Boulevard.
What about Center Street?
It's already there.
I'm asking to take it off.
Bryce?
It's already there, not only there, they're
Show
also
the yellow
there
part.
before the ordinance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Stewart? So the yellow portion is the addition.
The pink is already there.
That's what I thought. I thought it was only, then I heard this with last.
No, that's something that's currently in that Mr. Harding would like to be taken out.
So, Mr. Hardy?
Yes.
I just had a suggestion. There's two aspects of this that I feel are time sensitive.
Okay.
Would it be agreeable if we could bring your proposal back as a separate item as soon as 2 weeks from now? Because this has been advertised as we're going to make these changes, and there's just one new area we're proposing to add. We haven't advertised it as we're thinking about taking this.
Fair enough. Yes.
And we can bring back the Center Street issue at some point if we'd like to.
And in doing that, what graphics or information would be helpful?
I appreciate that question. It's a great question. Would you get with him on that, what you expect?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, it is coming up again. I think this was just to give the council some opportunities for some discussion as we bring this up again. Okay. Now I guess we have an opportunity to consider a closed session.
Yes, so we have a number of items that we'd like to discuss regarding reasonable imminent litigation and potential sale of property, which are, as you know, the reasons that a closed session is permitted, so it would be appropriate for a motion at this time.
Mr. Sewell, so make that motion. Mr. Van Buren seconds that. Those in favor? Hey, we'll adjourn to the other room for closed session.